Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos, where every story begins with a single question and follows it all the way to the end. Today's adventure: what if Harry and Hermione fell in love in their first year at Hogwarts? Before we dive in, if you're enjoying these journeys, do go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Comfortable? Good. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The third window. The cupboard under the stairs had taught Harry Potter to be small. Not in size, though he was that too, all knees and overlarge jumpers handed down from a cousin twice his width, small in the other way. He had learned to fold himself into corners, to take up no air the Dursleys might want, to want nothing out loud. A boy who wanted nothing could not be disappointed, and a boy who could not be disappointed gave Uncle Vernon nothing to punish. It was a sound system. Harry had spent 10 years perfecting it. So when the letters came, hundreds of them, pouring down the chimney and bursting from the eggs at breakfast, the strangest part was not the magic of it. The strangest part was that someone somewhere had written his name. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs. Somebody had known exactly where he slept and had wanted to reach him anyway. He thought about that more than he thought about Hagrid breaking down the door of the hut on the rock, or the pink umbrella, or Dudley's curly tail. He thought about it on the train platform that had no number anyone sensible would believe, where the great scarlet engine breathed steam over a crowd of people in robes and pointed hats. Somebody had wanted to reach him. He carried the thought the way another child might carry a coin in a pocket, taking it out now and then to make sure it was still real. Hagrid had pressed a ticket into his hand, and a great deal of advice he had mostly forgotten, and then the half-giant was gone in the crowd, and Harry was alone with a trolley, an owl, and a barrier he had been told to walk straight at and trust to give way. He had walked at it with his eyes shut. The wall let him through like water closing over stone. He found an empty compartment near the back, because empty was a thing he understood. He heaved his trunk up, sat by the window, and watched families say goodbye. A plump woman was fussing over a row of red-haired children. A small girl cried because she was too young to go. A father lifted a daughter clean off her feet and spun her, and the girl's laugh carried all the way down the platform and through the glass to where Harry sat. He looked at the place on the floor between his shoes until the spinning stopped. The train pulled out at 11 exactly. England slid past in gray and green, and Harry was beginning to think he might pass the entire journey without speaking to a soul, which would have suited him, when the compartment door rolled back. A girl stood there. She had a great deal of brown hair that seemed to have its own opinions, and front teeth a touch too large, and the expression of someone conducting an investigation she fully intended to win. "Has anyone seen a toad?" she said. "A boy named Neville's lost one, and he's nearly in tears about it, and nobody else is taking it the least bit seriously." "No," Harry said. "Sorry." She did not leave. She tilted her head and studied him in the frank way of a person who had not yet learned that staring was rude, or who had learned it and decided the rule was inefficient. Her eyes went to his forehead where the hair had fallen back and stopped. "You're Harry Potter," she said. Here it came. Braced for it 3 times already that morning, the swivel of attention, the reaching, the way grown wizards looked at his scar instead of his face. He waited for her to do whatever they all did. She did something else. She frowned. "Your glasses are crooked," she said. "The left arm's bent. It's been throwing the whole frame off, which is why you keep pushing them up. Hold still." "What? Hold still?" She set down the cat carrier she had been holding, came in without being asked, and sat across from him. From a pocket she produced a wand, holding it the way one holds something precious and slightly dangerous. "I've been practicing on the train. I've done a few small spells already and they all worked, and Professor, well, the book says it's a perfectly standard mending charm, first-year level. Only most people don't bother with it until later." She pointed the wand at the bridge of his nose. "Oculus reparo." Warmth ran along the metal arms of his glasses. The world, which had been very slightly slanted his whole life, came level. The bent arm straightened against his temple with a faint click. When he looked at her, the smudge that had lived in the corner of his vision since June was gone, and her face was sharp and near and watching him to see whether it had worked. "Better," she said. "Yeah," Harry said. He took the glasses off and looked at them and put them back on. They sat true. No one had ever fixed anything of his before. The Dursleys mended what was Dudley's. Harry's things stayed broken until they fell apart, and then he was blamed for breaking them. "Yeah, a lot better, thanks. Hermione Granger," she said, in a tone that settled a great many questions, and stuck out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and quick. "How'd you know the charm?" "I read about it. I've read all our set books already, of course. I've learned some of them by heart. I just hope it's enough. I'm Muggle-born, you see. Nobody in my family's magic at all. It came as ever such a surprise, but a pleasant one obviously, and I've found out everything I could." The words came out fast and bright, a torrent that had clearly been waiting for an audience and had despaired of finding one. "I do hope I'm not behind. Everyone on this train seems to have grown up knowing things." "I grew up not knowing anything," Harry said. "Found out a week ago." She looked at him with new attention. "And you're not frightened?" He considered the question honestly, which was a habit he had because lying took energy and the Dursleys had trained him to conserve. "I'd rather be here than where I was." Something in the plain way he said it made her go quiet for a moment, the torrent stilling. Then she nodded once, a person logging a fact she meant to keep. "Well," she said, I should keep looking for the toad, but she hesitated, and the hesitation was the first thing about her that seemed unsure. There's nowhere to sit, really. Everyone's full up, or they're older, or they talk about Quidditch the whole time and won't explain the rules. You can sit here, Harry said. If you want, Trevor might come to us. Trevor, she repeated. Is that the toad's name? How did you? I never said. Lucky guess. She smiled then properly, and it changed her whole investigating face into something younger and warmer, and she sat back down across from him and arranged her robes and folded her hands and looked, for the first time, like a girl on a train going somewhere wonderful rather than a prefect inspecting it. They were still there an hour later when the door opened again and a tall red-haired boy looked in, smudge of something on his nose, holding a fat gray rat. Anywhere, everywhere else is full. He took them in. Blimey, are you Harry Potter? Yes, said Hermione before Harry could answer, with the brisk authority of someone who had decided she was in charge of him now. And he's been very nice about it, so don't make a fuss. There's room. Mind your rat doesn't eat the chocolate frogs. The boy was Ron Weasley, 6th of 7, with a hand-me-down wand and a corned beef sandwich he plainly did not want, and within 10 minutes Harry liked him. Ron knew things, how Gringotts worked, why you never trusted a Slytherin, the names of all the Chudley cannons in losing order. Hermione knew different things, the founders, the moving staircases, the precise wording of the school motto, which she pronounced like a password to a club she badly wanted to join. Harry sat between the two of them as the trolley came, and he bought one of everything because he had gold of his own now and no one to take it, and he split it 3 ways without thinking, and Ron stared at the pile like a boy who had never once been given anything. You don't have to, Ron started. I want to, Harry said, and found it was true. It was an odd, full feeling to have something and to give it and to watch someone be glad. He wanted to do it again immediately. Hermione tried a chocolate frog, declared the experience thoroughly impractical because the things tried to jump out the window and then read the card so closely she nearly missed the toad when it finally turned up under the seat. Neville's Trevor had been with them the whole time. She delivered the toad personally to a round-faced, anxious boy 3 compartments down, lecturing him gently on responsibility the entire way, and came back looking pleased with the world. It was dark when the train slowed. A voice told them to leave their luggage, and then they were spilling out onto a tiny platform in a night that smelled of pine and cold water, and a lantern the size of a bonfire was bobbing toward them above the crowd. Fur's years, Hagrid bellowed. Fur's years over here. All rig, Harry. All right, Harry called back, and Hermione looked between him and the enormous man with frank curiosity. You know him. He's the one who came to get me, Harry said. He's the first person who was ever glad to see me. He had not meant to say the last part. It simply came out the way true things did around her, and he felt the heat climb his neck and waited for her to laugh or to pity him. She did neither. She looked at Hagrid waving his lantern and then at Harry, and she said, matter of fact, then I expect we'll like him. And then we landed somewhere under Harry's ribs and stayed. The boats took them across the Black Lake. The castle rose out of the dark all at once, every window lit, towers stacked on towers against the stars, and the whole boatful of first years went silent at the sight of it. Harry felt Hermione's hand close hard around his sleeve. I read about it, she whispered. I read everything, none of it said. She did not finish. She did not let go of his sleeve either the whole way across, and he found he did not want her to. The boat slid into a kind of underground harbor. Hagrid led them up a passage and out onto wet grass in the shadow of the castle, and up a flight of stone steps to a door big enough to swallow a house. And there a severe witch in emerald robes met them and told them they would be sorted into their houses, and that their houses would be like their family while they were at Hogwarts. Family, Hermione murmured, trying the word, and beside her Ron groaned about having to wrestle a troll, which Harry was fairly sure was a joke, and Hermione promptly began reciting every charm she had learned in case it was not. The sorting hall, when its doors opened, was the grandest room Harry had ever stood in, the ceiling lost in stars, 4 long tables packed with faces all turned to watch the new ones come. On a stool at the front sat a battered, patched, pointed hat. It twitched. A rip near the brim opened like a mouth, and it sang. Harry did not hear much of the song. He was looking at the 4 tables and thinking that in a few minutes he would be sent to one of them, and Hermione might be sent to another, and the thought put a cold weight in him he had no name for. He had been alone his whole life and had not minded it because he had not known there was another way. He had known another way now for exactly 1 afternoon, and already the prospect of losing it sat worse than 10 years of the cupboard. Names were called. A girl went to a table that cheered. A boy went to a table that cheered. Then Granger, Hermione. She marched up like a candidate to an examination, and Harry watched her sit and pull the hat down over her eyes, and he watched her go very still under it. The hat took its time. It muttered. Hermione's hands were knotted in her lap. Then the rip opened wide. Gryffindor, a table on the left, roared. Hermione pulled off the hat, found Harry in the crowd before she found anything else, and gave him a look that was half triumph and half a question, and the question was plain enough. Will you be here too? He did not know. The hat was not his to command. He watched her sit down among the red and gold and twist round to keep watching the sorting, watching him, and he willed the hat with everything he had. Potter, Harry. The hall broke into whispers, the swivel and crane of every neck, but Harry barely heard it. He went up, sat, and the hat dropped over his eyes, and a small voice spoke inside his skull. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind. There's talent, oh yes, and a thirst to prove yourself. Slytherin would make you great, you know. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. No doubt about that. I don't want greatness, Harry thought, and was surprised to find that he meant it absolutely. He looked behind his shut eyes at the only picture he had that was worth wanting. A compartment with the light going gold, a wand fixing his glasses, a girl saying put me where she is, Harry thought, please, wherever she is. The hat was quiet a moment. Loyalty like that, it said, and there was something almost gentle in it, rarer than courage and worth more in the end, though few believe it until too late. You'll do, I think, very well in Gryffindor. The table on the left came apart with noise. Harry pulled off the hat, and the first thing he saw was Hermione on her feet, both hands clapping over her head, beaming at him like he had won a prize, and the red-haired twins were chanting, we got Potter, and he walked to the table on legs that did not feel quite like his and dropped into the seat she had saved beside her. I hoped, she said low under the noise. I hoped so much. I told myself it didn't matter, houses are an arbitrary 19th century affectation really, but then they called you and I. She stopped. She had run out of brisk. I'm glad, she said simply. Me too, Harry said. Ron came to them 10 minutes later, also Gryffindor, dropping into the seat across with the boneless relief of a boy who had feared the worst, and the three of them were together, and the gold plates filled with more food than Harry had seen in his life, and a ghost drifted through the table and apologized, and somewhere above them the stars on the ceiling wheeled, and Harry ate until he ached and did not once think of the cupboard. At the staff table, an old wizard with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles watched the Gryffindor end of the hall. His eyes, very blue, moved from the famous boy with the scar to the bushy-haired girl leaning to murmur in his ear, and the girl who made him laugh, and Harry laughing in the unpracticed way of someone using the muscle for the first time. The headmaster's expression did not change. But he watched them after his attention might reasonably have moved on, and when at last he looked away and reached for his goblet, the watching had left something behind on his face that no one at the cheering tables was placed to see. Professor Dumbledore sipped his wine and considered the child he had left on a doorstep 10 years before, and the unplanned thing that had just sat down beside him, and weighed them both with a tenderness that did not soften the calculation underneath. He had given a great deal of thought to keeping Harry Potter alive. He had given a great deal of thought, too, to keeping him reachable for the day he would be needed. A boy with a whole heart was harder to point at a single purpose than a boy who had only ever wanted one thing. He set the goblet down. The sorting went on, and he smiled at it, and behind the smile he began, very quietly, to wonder. Hogwarts, it turned out, was a castle that did not want to be learned. The staircases moved. Doors pretended to be walls. A suit of armor would point you confidently toward a corridor that ended in a broom cupboard, and a portrait of a knight who challenged you to a duel for the inconvenience. Harry got lost 4 times the first morning, and would have been late to everything if not for the girl who had appeared at the foot of the dormitory stairs at 7:30 with a folded square of parchment. I mapped it, Hermione said, by way of good morning. She unfolded the parchment to show a careful grid of corridors, annotated in a hand so neat it looked printed. Last night, I couldn't sleep. The beds are very soft and I'm not used to soft, so I walked the routes between all our classes and timed them. The Charms corridor floods on Tuesdays. Apparently, there's a note about it on the door, so we go the long way that day. I made you a copy. She held it out. Harry took it and looked at the hours of work in his hand, the little inked arrows, the times and minutes beside each. You made me a copy, he said. Well, you'd only get lost, she said, brisk, already turning for the portrait hole, and did not see his face, which was for the best, because he had not arranged it into anything yet, and he would not have wanted her to see it before he had. That was the first day. By the end of the first week, they had a place. It was in the library, in the far corner past the towering stacks of the Charms section, where 3 tall windows let the morning in over a long oak table that nobody else seemed to want because the radiator beneath it knocked. Hermione found it. She tried every table in the room with the seriousness of a cat choosing where to sleep, and settled at last on the one under the 3rd window the farthest, where the light fell longest and the knocking radiator kept the cold off your ankles, and she spread her books across it and declared it acceptable. We'll work here, she said. There's room for 3 and the light's best, and Madame Pince can't see us from her desk, so she won't shush us before we've even said anything, which she does. I've noticed she does it on principle. So they worked there. Hermione worked because she loved it, the way some children love flying or sweets, helplessly and completely. Ron worked because Hermione stood over him until he did. And Harry worked because the table under the 3rd window was the first place that had ever been his, partly his, a place where a chair was understood to be where he sat, and his name on a piece of homework was a thing somebody would check and care about. Hermione checked his essays. She did not do them, she was very firm about that, ethics being another thing she had read all about, but she read them over and made small noises and crossed things out and wrote expand this. You're right, but you've not said why in the margins. And Harry, who had spent 10 years being told he was stupid by people who needed him to be, learned at the table under the third window that he was not. He learned other things too. He learned that Hermione bit the end of her quill when a problem was hard and chewed straight through the feather when it was harder. He learned that she could not pass a question unanswered, that an unsolved thing itched at her until she scratched it, which was a quality the teachers loved and her classmates did not, because she put her hand up before they had finished being afraid of the question. He learned to nudge her foot under the table when she was about to do it in a way that would cost her, and she learned to feel the nudge and lower the hand, and it became a thing between them that no one else could see, a private language of one boy's shoe and one girl's restraint. And she learned to fix his glasses. They slipped, the mended arm working loose over a week of being pushed up his nose, and she would reach over without looking up from her book, 2 fingers to the bridge, and set them straight, oculus reparo under her breath when they needed it, the warmth running along the metal, and go back to reading. By October she did it as you would brush a crumb off someone you'd known for years, automatic, unremarked, and Harry stopped pushing them up himself because he had stopped, somewhere in there, expecting to have to fix his own broken things. What he could not do at the table was sit still on a broom. That was his. The first flying lesson came on a bright cold Thursday, the whole of Gryffindor and Slytherin on the lawn with a school broom each lying in the grass, and Madame Hooch barking at them to stick out a hand and say up. Hermione's broom rolled over on the ground and refused to come to her, and she said up to it 12 times in a voice that grew steadily more affronted, and it did not care because brooms did not read. Harry's came to his hand the instant he reached for it, smacking into his palm like it had been waiting for him. He did not know how he knew the rest. He knew it like Hermione knew a charm she had practiced, except he had never practiced. When Fat Neville's broom bolted skyward with Neville clinging to it white and wailing and dropped him, and the remember-all his grandmother had sent rolled out of the grass, and Malfoy of Slytherin snatched it up and shot into the air laughing to throw it from the top of the castle, Harry was on his broom before he had decided to be. The ground fell away. The wind took his hair. The fear that lived in him always, low and constant, the fear of being too much trouble, of wanting too loudly, went silent, and there was only the cold air and the small glass ball falling and his hand reaching, and he caught it a foot off the grass in a dive that pulled his stomach into his throat and rolled and stood, and the world was very loud all at once. Professor McGonagall had him by the ear before he could be pleased about it, and he thought he was finished, expelled in his first month, and he looked across the lawn for the one face that would tell him how bad it really was. Hermione's hands were pressed over her mouth. Her eyes were enormous. She was not looking at his ear or at the furious professor. She was looking at him like a problem she could not yet explain and fully intended to, and when McGonagall marched him off toward the castle, Hermione took 2 steps after him before she caught herself. He was not expelled. He was made Seeker, the youngest in a century, given over to a tall older boy named Wood who spoke about Quidditch like Hermione spoke about books, and that evening at the table under the third window Hermione had 3 library volumes on Quidditch waiting, open to the relevant pages with the rules of the Seeker's position underlined. "If you're going to do something that dangerous," she said, not looking up, "you'll do it knowing what you're doing. I've marked the parts about how often Seekers get hurt." "There are a great many parts. You read 3 books about Quidditch," Harry said. "You said it was tedious. It is tedious." She turned a page with some violence. "It's also you now, so I read them. Sit down, you're blocking my light." He sat down. He read about the snitch with her shoulder warm against his, and Ron drew diagrams of the cannon's famous losses, and the radiator knocked, and the October light came long and gold through the third window, and Harry Potter, who had been small his whole life on purpose, felt himself very carefully beginning to take up room in the world. It went wrong on Halloween, the way good things sometimes go wrong, not from any great malice but from one careless boy in an afternoon that had gone too well. It was in charms. Professor Flitwick had them levitating feathers, Wingardium Leviosa, and the whole class was failing in interesting ways, setting feathers on fire and shooting them across the room, all but Hermione, who got hers floating on the third try with the swish-in flick exactly as the book described, the feather rising serene above her head while the rest of them flailed. Ron beside her jabbed at his feather and snarled the words and got nothing, and being 11 and proud and watched, he took it out on the nearest target. "It's Leviosa, not Leviosa," Hermione said, trying to help in the precise tone that had earned her no friends in 11 years of trying to help. "You do it then if you're so clever," Ron snapped, and then when the bell rang and they were filing out to a knot of boys who laughed, "It's no wonder no one can stand her." The nightmare, honestly. Harry was a few feet behind. He saw Hermione go past at a quick walk with her chin up and her books clutched to her chest, and he saw the chin and knew it for what it was because he had worn the same one for 10 years. The chin you put up so the rest of your face had something to hang from. She walked fast. She did not look at anyone. She turned the corner toward the girls' bathrooms and was gone. "What?" Harry said to Ron. "What?" Ron had the grace to look uncomfortable. "She heard me. She heard you." "Well, she is a bit of a she fixed your feather essay last night," Harry said. "She fixes everything. She mapped the whole castle so we wouldn't be late. She read 3 books about Quidditch she thinks is boring because I'm doing it." He was not loud. The Dursleys had taught him that being loud got you nowhere. It was the quiet ones who got listened to in the end when they finally spoke. "She hasn't got anyone, Ron. She talks like that because no one's ever wanted what she's offering, and you just told a corridor full of people she's a nightmare." Ron went red to the ears. "I didn't think she'd know," Harry said. "You didn't," and he went to find her. She was not at dinner. The great hall was decorated for the feast, 1,000 live bats wheeling under the ceiling, the candles burning inside grinning pumpkins the size of garden sheds, and the platters loaded, and Hermione's seat under the bats was empty. Harry sat through 10 minutes of it with the empty seat beside him like a missing tooth, and he was about to get up and go to her, feast or no feast, when the doors banged open and Professor Quirrell came sprinting up the hall in his great purple turban, terror on his face. "Troll," he gasped. "Troll in the dungeons, thought you ought to know." And he fainted, face first, onto the flagstones. The hall erupted. Dumbledore's voice cut through it, sending prefects to lead the houses to their dormitories, and the students surged up in a screaming tide, and Harry, caught in the middle of it being carried toward the stairs, grabbed Ron's sleeve and hauled him out of the current into the shelter of a doorway. "Hermione," Harry said. He watched the word land. He watched Ron understand it. Hermione in the girls' bathroom, crying over the thing Ron had said, with no idea a mountain troll was loose in the castle and no one going to tell her. "She doesn't know," Ron said, and to his great and lasting credit the red drained out of his face and something better came into it. "She doesn't know, come on." They went the wrong way on purpose, against the crowd, down a corridor emptying of fleeing students, and Harry's map of the castle was in his head now after a month of Hermione's parchment, and he led them by the short way toward the girls' bathrooms on the 2nd floor. And as they ran, a smell rolled down the corridor to meet them, a foul, raw animal stench that made Ron gag, and then they heard it. A shuffling thud, slow, enormous footfalls, and a low grunting that was nothing a person made. They flattened against the wall as it came around the corner ahead of them. 12 feet of gray muscled horror, a head too small for the body, a club of a tree branch dragging from one fist, dull little eyes, and a smell like a blocked drain in summer. It did not see them. It lumbered to a doorway, ducked, and went in, into the girls' bathroom. "That's," Ron began. Harry was already running. He hit the bathroom door at a sprint, and the scene inside printed itself on him all at once. The troll filling half the room, the sink shattering under its club as it swung, the spray of water and porcelain, and Hermione pressed back against the wall under the far window where she had retreated as far as a person could retreat, her face wet, her mouth open, no scream coming out because terror had taken even that. The troll raised its club over the row of stalls. Hermione shrank down. There was nowhere left to go. "Hey," Harry shouted. "Hey." The troll turned its small, ugly head. What happened next, Harry could never afterward put in proper order because it happened in the place where order does not reach. He threw a metal pipe at the troll's head and missed. He shouted Hermione's name and pointed at the gap by the door. "Run, the door, Hermione, run," and she did not run, because the troll was between them and she would have had to pass under the club to reach him. And she would not, he saw it on her face even then, white and streaming, the refusal. She would not leave the room while he was in it. Ron threw a tap and hit the wall. The troll swung at Harry and the wind of the club knocked him flat. And then Harry was on his feet and running, and he did the only mad thing left, which was to get a running start and leap. And he landed on the troll's back with both arms around its neck and his wand still in his fist, and the wand went, by pure terrified accident, straight up the troll's left nostril. The troll bellowed. It reared, swinging, trying to shake him loose, and Harry held on with his legs and one arm and his eyes streaming from the stench, and he looked across the heaving room and shouted the only thing he could think to shout, which was not help and was not run, but a name and a charm. Hermione, the club, Leviosa, she understood. Of course she understood. She had floated her feather on the 3rd try while the room burned theirs. She had read all the books. She came off the wall, soaked, shaking, and she planted her feet, and she got her wand up, and she did the swish and the flick exactly right, her voice cracking on the word, but the word landing true. Wingardium Leviosa, the great club tore itself out of the troll's fist. It rose, turning into the air above the small, ugly head, and hung there one impossible moment with the water dripping off it. Hermione's wand came down. The club came down with it, all its weight, and struck the troll square on the skull with a sound like a door slamming in a cathedral. The troll swayed, its little eyes crossed, and it fell, with Harry leaping clear at the last second, fell full length with a crash that shook plaster from the ceiling, and lay still. For a moment there was only the hiss of the broken pipes and 3 children breathing. Harry got up off the wet floor. He pulled his wand out of the troll's nose, which was disgusting, and wiped it on the thing's hide. He crossed the wreckage of the room to where Hermione stood, still in her firing stance, wand up, staring at what she had done. He reached her and she lowered the wand at last and looked at him, and neither of them said anything clever because there was nothing clever to say. "You came," she said. Her voice was very small. "I said horrid things to that boy and he said horrid things back, and I came in here to be miserable on my own where it doesn't bother anybody, because that's what I do. I take myself off so I'm not, and nobody knew where I was, and the troll came and I thought nobody even knows I'm here. And then she stopped. She tried again. You came the wrong way down the whole castle for me." "Course I did," Harry said, as though it were obvious, as though it were the only possible thing. To him it was both. Why? He thought about it, because she deserved a true answer and not a quick one. The bathroom dripped around them. Ron stood by the door looking from one of them to the other, understanding that he was present at something and being decent enough to be quiet for it. "Because you fixed my glasses," Harry said at last, which was not the whole of it but was the shape of the whole of it. "On the train, you didn't ask about my scar. You just fixed the thing that was broken and made me a map so I wouldn't be lost and saved me a seat. Nobody ever did any of that, and I thought if a troll was going to get anybody tonight, it wasn't going to get the one person who," he ran out like she had earlier and finished it plainly because plain was all he had. "You're my friend. I haven't had one before. I wasn't going to lose you to a troll on the first month." Hermione's face did something complicated and then gave up doing anything and simply crumpled, and she crossed the last foot between them and put her arms around him and held on, hard, like she had gripped his sleeve on the boat, and Harry, who did not know what to do with being held because no one had practiced it on him, put his arms around her and learned. That was how Professor McGonagall found them, and Snape limping behind her, and Quirrell, recovered and trembling, 2 first-years embracing in a flooded bathroom over the body of an unconscious mountain troll, with a third standing guard at the door. There was shouting, naturally. McGonagall in full flight was a thing to behold. But Hermione, who had never told a lie to a teacher in her life and would not have known how, told one then, smooth as anything, that she had gone looking for the troll herself, thinking she could handle it, having read about them, and that Harry and Ron had come to save her from her own foolishness. She took the blame and the lost points and gave Harry and Ron the credit, and she did it without a tremor, and Harry understood that she had just done for him the same kind of thing he had done coming down the corridor, spent something of herself gladly to keep him out of trouble. When the teachers had gone, when the points were docked and awarded and the 3 of them were sent up to Gryffindor Tower with a stern instruction to go straight to bed, they walked the moving stairs in a silence that was not empty. "You lied to McGonagall," Harry said, "for us." "I'll never do it again," Hermione said. "It was awful, my heart's still going." "But you'd have lost more points than me. You can't afford it with Quidditch, and Ron," she glanced at Ron, and Ron looked at the floor, and she said, gentler than Harry had ever heard her, "Ron came back for me too. After what he said, that counts for more than the saying did." "I'm sorry," Ron said to his shoes. "What I said, it was rotten. You're not a nightmare. He searched for it. You float clubs onto trolls. That's the best thing I've ever seen anybody do." Hermione laughed wetly, surprised out of herself, and it was settled between the 3 of them in the way only things settled in the wreckage of a bad night can be settled, completely and without ceremony. At the portrait hole, before they went into the warm noise of the common room, Hermione stopped. She looked at the 2 boys in the torchlight, soaked and bruised and grinning, and she said in the tone of someone getting something on the record, "I read, before all this, that the most important things were books and being clever. I rather built my whole self on it, and I was wrong." She looked at Harry. "There are more important things, friendship and bravery, and going the wrong way down a whole castle for somebody who took herself off to cry alone." Her voice steadied on it as it had steadied on the charm. "Friendship and bravery, I shan't forget it." "Friendship and bravery," Harry said, trying the words, and found they fit his mouth, found they fit the strange full feeling under his ribs that had started in a train compartment and had been growing all October like the light through the 3rd window. They went in together. The fat lady's portrait swung shut behind them. Far below, in a study at the top of a different tower, an old wizard sat with the night's reports laid out before him, the troll, the bathroom, the 3 names. He read them, and he was glad the children were alive, and he was glad with the whole of an old heart that had buried more students than he could bear to count. But under the gladness ran the careful current that never quite went still in him, and it noted, the way a gardener notes a vine taking hold where he had not planted it, that the Potter boy had gone down a corridor full of danger not for glory and not for duty but for a single bushy-haired girl, and would clearly do it again and again for the rest of a life that Albus Dumbledore had reason to believe would be required one day to be given up. Love made people brave. He knew that better than anyone living. It also made them unwilling at the last to walk into the dark alone. He sat a long while with the reports, and the candle burned down, and he did not yet decide anything. But he began, that Halloween, to watch the table under the 3rd window, and he began to think about what it might cost when the time came to ask a boy with a whole heart to do the thing he had been left on a doorstep to do. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. What the mirror wanted after the troll. The three of them were a unit, and the school noticed. It noticed that Hermione no longer ate alone but sat hemmed between two boys who saved her a seat. It noticed that Harry Potter, the famous one, the one everybody had craned to see at the sorting, spent his free hours not basking in attention but bent over a library table under three tall windows, doing homework of all the dull things with a girl correcting his grammar. People found this faintly disappointing. Harry found it the best thing that had ever happened to him. November came down cold and hard, and with it the first Quidditch match of his life. Hermione made him eat breakfast, which he did not want. "You'll faint at 50 feet on an empty stomach, and then where will we be?" she said, pushing toast at him across the Gryffindor table, and he ate the toast because arguing with her about whether she was right was a thing he had already learned he would lose. She had a scarf in Gryffindor colors she had knitted badly and given him the night before, and she wore its twin, and Ron had one too, and the three lions sat in a row in the stands while Harry went down to the changing rooms with his stomach somewhere around his knees. The match started clean. Harry rose into the cold above the pitch, and the fear went quiet the moment his feet left the ground, the world narrowing to wind and the gold gleam he hunted. Then his broom tried to kill him. It bucked and dropped and kicked like a thing trying to throw a rider, and Harry clung on 50 feet up while it rolled beneath him. The commentary faltered, people stood, and Hermione, who had brought brass opera glasses to the match because of course she had, swung them not toward Harry but along the staff stands face by face because a broom that good did not simply malfunction, and she wanted to know why. She found Professor Quirrell first, oddly muttering, eyes locked on Harry. Then Snape beside him, also staring, also muttering, his lips moving without pause. Hermione had read about jinxes. A broom curse required eye contact and an unbroken incantation. Break the eye contact, break the curse. "Stay here," she told Ron, and was gone down the stands before he could ask where. She went under the seats, along the wooden scaffolding beneath the staff box, crouched and quick, and she came up directly behind the row where the teachers sat, and she did the most reckless thing she had done in her short, careful life. She reached past three people to the hem of Professor Snape's robes, pointed her wand at it low and hidden, and whispered, "Lacernum inflammare," blue flames caught in the black cloth. By the time Snape understood his robes were burning and broke off to beat them out, knocking Quirrell and half the front row sprawling in the scramble, Harry's broom had gone still beneath him. He caught the snitch 90 seconds later, half by accident, nearly swallowing it in a dive that ended with him sprawled on the pitch spitting the gold ball into his hand. Gryffindor won. The stands came apart with noise. When Harry found his way back to the others, grass-stained and grinning, Hermione had soot on her sleeve and a look on her face that was not triumph. "It was a curse," she said before he could speak. "Someone was trying to throw you off. I broke their eye contact." She lowered her voice though the crowd was roaring around them. "Harry, it was a teacher. That was the start of it." The mystery took root at the table under the third window, and Hermione tended it like she tended everything with index cards. She had clues none of them could yet read. There was the thing in the third-floor corridor, forbidden on pain of a very painful death, which Ron's brothers swore was guarded by something with three heads. There was the break-in at Gringotts over the summer, a vault emptied the same day Hagrid had emptied a different vault on Dumbledore's orders, carrying away one small, grubby package. There was Snape, who hated Harry with an attention that felt too large to be ordinary dislike, and who had tried to get past whatever the three-headed dog guarded because Harry had seen the bite on his leg. And there was a name Harry had overheard Hagrid let slip and snatch back, Nicholas Flamel. "Flamel," Hermione said, tapping a card. "I know I've read it somewhere recent. It's going to drive me mad." It drove her mad for 6 weeks. She searched the library section by section, and Madame Pince eyed her, and the Christmas holidays came before she found it. Almost everyone went home for Christmas. Harry did not, because home was a cupboard and people who would not be glad to see him, and he had not even considered going. What he had not expected was that Hermione would stay too. "My parents are skiing," she said, which was true, "and I'd only be in the way. They go every year, and I read in the chalet," which was also true. She did not say the third real thing, which Harry understood anyway, fluent in her by now. She had thought about him alone in a half-empty castle over Christmas and decided privately that it was not going to happen. She wrote to her parents and stayed. Ron stayed too, his family gone to Romania to visit a brother, and the three of them had the run of a snowed-in castle and a common room fire they did not have to share. It was, by a wide margin, the best Christmas Harry had ever had, and it had barely started before it became the best. He woke on Christmas morning to a thing he had never woken to, a pile of presents, small but his, a lumpy parcel from Hagrid, a 50-pence piece from the Dursleys that Ron, who had never seen Muggle money, found fascinatingly useless, and a hand-knitted jumper from Ron's mother, who had never met Harry but had heard he stayed at school with nowhere to go, and had knitted a 6th jumper that year so there would be one for him. Harry held it a while before he put it on and said nothing about it. Ron, from a house with too much love and too little money, would not have understood. Harry had no words to explain that a stranger knitting him a jumper because he had nowhere to go had reached past 10 years of careful smallness and undone something. And there was a last parcel, no cards, soft and silvery, that poured through his hands like woven water when he lifted it. A note in narrow, looping writing, no signature. Your father left this in my possession before he died. Time it was returned to you. Use it well, an invisibility cloak, his father's. Hermione, when he showed them later, was torn between two of her deepest instincts, a rule-abiding horror at the trouble such a thing could cause and a scholar's hunger to know how it worked, the hunger one as it generally did. True invisibility cloaks are vanishingly rare, they don't fade, most so-called cloaks are charmed and wear off in a year. This is your father's, Harry, this is real. Who sent it? There's no name. She turned the note over and over. Someone wanted you to have it and didn't want you to know who. That's two things at once, and I don't like either. Harry liked it. It was his father's. Somebody had kept it safe for 10 years and given it back. He put it on that night when the others were asleep and went walking. He told himself he was going to the restricted section to look for Flamel, and he half meant it, but the library at night with a candle was a cold and creaking place, and a book screamed when he opened it, and he fled, and somewhere in the fleeing he took a wrong turn into a part of the castle he did not know, into a disused classroom where the desks were stacked against the walls and one tall object stood alone under a dust sheet that had slipped to the floor. A mirror. Gold-framed, taller than the ceiling had any right to allow, its frame carved with words he could not read upside down. Erised stra eruoit ube cafruoit on wosi. Harry stepped in front of it and stopped breathing for a moment because he was not alone in the glass. There were people behind him in the mirror, a crowd of them, and the room behind him was empty. A man stood at his shoulder, tall, untidy black hair, glasses, a hand on Harry's reflected shoulder. A woman beside him, red-haired, green-eyed, smiling at Harry with her whole face wet. More behind them, going back and back, each with some piece of him in a nose or a chin or the set of a head. His family, the Dursleys had said died drunk in a car crash, the family no one would describe, looking at him out of the glass with a love so plain that Harry put his hand to the cold surface, and the woman raised hers to meet it on her side, and they could not touch, and he did not care. He would have stood there until he starved, and there at the edge of the crowd of his dead, half a step in from the gilded frame, stood a living girl with a great deal of brown hair, looking out at him the same as the rest of them, as though she belonged in the picture of everyone who loved him because she did. He did not understand why she was there. He understood the dead. He had no name yet for why the mirror, asked to show the deepest want of his heart, had set Hermione Granger among his mother and father, and he was 11 and did not go looking for the name. He knew only that the picture was right, that it was complete, that it had everyone in it, and that leaving it would be the hardest thing he had done. He brought Ron the next night. The mirror showed Ron grown and gleaming with prizes his family had never been able to give, and Harry understood his friend a little better. He went back a third night alone because he could not stay away. On the third night he was not alone. So, said a quiet voice from the dark, and Harry spun, and Professor Dumbledore was sitting on a desk against the wall, almost invisible in his dark robes, watching. Back again, Harry. Harry's pulse jumped. He had not heard him come in. I didn't see you, sir. Strange how short-sighted being invisible can make you. Dumbledore smiled, and the smile was kind, and Harry trusted it mostly as you trust weather. You have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Erised, I see. It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts, Dumbledore said. The happiest man alive would look in it and see only himself exactly as he is. You who have never known your family see them standing around you. His blue eyes rested on Harry, warmth in them and something underneath the warmth that watched. And yet, I am told you have been here 3 nights running, and I do not think the family is the whole of what you keep coming back to see. Harry said nothing. The girl at the edge of the glass was a private thing, and he did not have words for her, and he would not have given the words to anyone even if he had. Dumbledore was quiet a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had gentled, and that was when Harry, who had spent 10 years reading the tone of adults to know when one of them was about to take something from him, felt the small, cold note under the kindness. This mirror gives us neither knowledge nor truth, Dumbledore said. Men have wasted away before it or been driven mad not knowing whether what it shows is real or even possible. It does not do to dwell on dreams, Harry, and forget to live. He paused. You have a great capacity for attachment. The world will tell you it is a strength. The blue eyes did not waver. It is also a door. Everything that loves can be made to grieve, and everyone who is loved can be used to make the lover do as he is told. There may come a day when the safest thing you own is the ability to stand alone. I should hate for you to lose the trick of it before you need it. He said it kindly, as a grandfather might warn a child off a frozen pond. Harry, 11 years old and starved his whole life for the attachments the old man warned him against, heard the warning and rejected it without a word. The picture in the glass held his mother and his father and a living girl who had stayed at school so he would not be alone at Christmas. No kind old wizard was going to talk him out of the only thing he had ever wanted. The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow, Dumbledore said, rising, and I must ask you not to go looking for it again. Good night, Harry. Harry went. At the door he looked back. Dumbledore had turned to the mirror and was standing before it, an old man alone in an empty room looking at whatever an old man alone wants most, and his face in the gold glow was not a face Harry could read, and Harry left him to it. He told Hermione everything the next morning at the table under the third window, all of it except the part about who stood at the edge of the glass. He told her what Dumbledore had said about standing alone. Hermione went very still. She had a way of going still when something reached past what she wanted to show, and Harry knew it now, and he watched her do it. He's not wrong that it's dangerous, she said slowly. To care about people, that part's true. She turned her quill over in her fingers. But people who love you being used against you is only half of it. People who love you are also the only reason anyone survives anything. Your mum didn't stand alone, and you're here and she isn't, and I'd bet you anything she didn't manage it by being good at being lonely. She set the quill down. When a grown wizard you've known 4 months tells an 11-year-old to practice being alone, I want to know who that's for, because it isn't for you. It was the most disloyal thing he had ever heard anyone say about Albus Dumbledore, and she said it looking him straight in the eye. Hermione Granger was the bravest person he had ever met, and her bravery looked nothing like his. His happened to him at speed, on a broom or in a flooded bathroom. Hers she chose in daylight, eyes open, saying the dangerous true thing out loud at a library table because someone she cared about needed to hear it. Friendship and bravery, he said, which had become the thing they said. Friendship and bravery, she agreed. And then, because she could not help herself, she pulled a book toward her and cracked it open and said, Now, Flamel, I am going to find this man if it takes me until summer, and bent to the page. It took her until February. She came pelting into the common room one evening with a book the size of a paving slab clutched to her chest, having at last remembered where she had read the name. Nicholas Flamel, she read out breathless, is the only known maker of the philosopher's stone. She looked up at them over the top of the slab, and the firelight caught her face, and the mystery cracked open in her hands. The stone produces the elixir of life, which makes the drinker immortal, and it can turn any metal into pure gold. Flamel is over 600 years old, and the only known stone in the world is being kept, right now, under a trapdoor on the 3rd floor, guarded by a 3-headed dog, because somebody is trying to steal it. The 3 of them looked at one another in the firelight, and whoever it is, Harry said slowly, cursed my broom, and got past a goblin bank, said Ron, and tried to get past the dog, said Hermione, and got bitten doing it. She closed the slab. Her hands were not quite steady on the cover, and she pressed them flat to hide it. We should tell a teacher, they told a teacher. The teacher, Professor McGonagall, informed them with crisp finality that the stone was extremely well protected, and that they should put it out of their heads and concern themselves with their studies, which children their age had no business doing anything but. She was entirely right and entirely wrong at the same time, in the specific way adults so often were, and the 3 of them went away knowing it. They knew it harder a few weeks later. Hagrid's illegal dragon ended with Norbert shipped off to Romania at midnight, Harry and Hermione caught out of bed, and 50 points each off Gryffindor. The whole house turned cold on them, which wounded Hermione worse than she let on, being disliked by people she had only just started to belong with. Harry could not fix it, he could sit with her through it. Their detention took them into the Forbidden Forest to hunt whatever was killing unicorns, and there Harry saw a hooded shape drink silver blood from a dying unicorn, and his scar split with pain, and a centaur carried him clear and told him the drinker was a man keeping himself alive while he was less than alive, waiting to become whole. Harry knew who. He had known in some buried way since the pain in his scar. He's here, he told Hermione and Ron that night, the 3 of them crammed into a corner of the common room with the fire burned to coals. Voldemort. Ron flinched at the name. Hermione did not, though her hands found each other in her lap and gripped. He's barely alive, drinking unicorn blood to last, and he wants the stone because the elixir would make him whole. And tonight Hagrid let slip how to get past the dog to a stranger in a pub, the one who gave him the dragon egg. He looked at them. He's going for the stone, maybe tonight, and the only one who could stop him is Dumbledore. Then we go to Dumbledore, Hermione said at once. They went. Dumbledore was not there. He had been called away to the ministry by an urgent owl an hour before. McGonagall told them at the door of his office, looking at them like 3 slightly hysterical children, which to be fair they were, and sent them to bed. It was the urgent owl that decided Harry. A summons to London the very night the thief was going for the stone, drawing the one wizard Voldemort feared out of the castle. Too neat, too well timed. He thought of his cursed broom and the figure in the clearing and the kind old wizard who had told him to practice standing alone, and he thought, there is no one coming. There is only us. He told the others he was going down through the trapdoor that night with the cloak to try to stop it, and that they did not have to come. Hermione looked at him as though he had said something genuinely stupid, which in fairness he had. Harry, she said, we're coming. Don't insult us by asking. She was already on her feet, already 3 steps into a plan. Get the cloak. I'll bring my wand and Ron's and the book on plants just in case. We are not going to die tonight because I refuse, and I have never once failed to get a thing I refused about. She was frightened. He could see every inch of how frightened she was. She was going anyway, and she made it sound like a study schedule so that he could be frightened too and still go. "Friendship and bravery," she said, and held out her hand for the cloak. He gave it to her. Of course he did. The third-floor corridor was unlocked, which it should not have been, and that told them the thief had come this way before them. Behind the door, the three-headed dog filled the room, vast, drooling, and fast asleep, because someone had left a harp playing itself in the corner, and a dog that size needs music to keep it under. Under one enormous paw was the trapdoor. "He's already been," Hermione breathed. "He charmed the harp and went down. We have to move before the music stops." They moved. The harp's notes were already slowing, the dog stirring, when Harry heaved the trapdoor up and they looked down into black nothing. There was no telling how far it fell. "I'll go first," Harry said. "We'll go together," said Hermione, and took his hand, and Ron took her other hand, and the three of them sat on the lip of the hole with the dog waking above them and the music dying, and they jumped into the dark holding onto each other. They landed soft, too soft. The floor was not a floor, it was alive, a mass of dark snaking tendrils that came up around them the instant they touched it, looping wrists and ankles, twining up Harry's chest toward his throat, and the harder he pulled the faster it gripped. "Don't move," Hermione's voice came sharp out of the dark. "Stop struggling, both of you. It's devil's snare, I know it, I've read it, it likes the dark and the damp. The more you fight, the more it kills you. Relax." "Relax, Harry, trust me, go limp." Harry made himself go limp against every screaming instinct, and the tendrils, finding no fight, loosened and let him sink gently through to the cold stone floor below. Ron did not. Ron thrashed and the plant tightened, a coil sliding up over his face. "It likes the dark and the damp," Hermione said again to herself, now fast, in the voice she used for a hard exam question, and Harry heard her find it. "Damp, it hates fire." "I haven't got any wood, there's no wood, I can't. Are you a witch or not?" Harry shouted from below, which was the most useful thing he ever said to her, because it knocked her out of the trap of needing a fire to be a proper fire with logs in it. "Well, of course," she said, and her wand came up and blue flame burst from it, the same charm she had used on Snape's robes at the Quidditch match, and the devil's snare recoiled shrieking from the light and the heat and let Ron go, and he dropped through to land beside Harry, gasping. Hermione stepped down through the curling, retreating dark, calm as anything, dusting herself off, the firelight gilding her face. "Lucky," said Ron weakly, "you pay attention in herbology." "Lucky," Hermione agreed, "one of us does." The next chamber rang with the sound of 100 wings. The air above them was full of bright fluttering things, and when their eyes adjusted, the things were keys, hundreds of winged keys swarming under a high ceiling, and on the far side a heavy locked door, and against the wall 3 battered broomsticks. "We have to catch the right one," Hermione said, "and fly to do it." She looked at the broomsticks, and then she looked at Harry, and something in her face changed and steadied. "It has to be you. You're the youngest seeker in a century. I read about it. I read 3 books. Her voice was not quite even. "I can't fly, Harry. I'm hopeless and I'm frightened of it, but I have watched every single practice you've had this whole year from the stands, every one, and I have never once doubted you'd catch the thing you were after. Go and catch it." He looked at her, the girl who hated heights, who had come down a corridor full of dying unicorns, who was now standing under a swarm of enchanted keys telling him she had watched all his practices. He mounted the broom and kicked off. The right key was old, large, silver, with a bent wing, because it had already been caught once tonight and roughly used. He spotted it, and the rest of the swarm came at him in a glittering storm, and he flew as he was born to, rolling and climbing through the hail of keys, and pinned the old silver one against the stone with his palm and tossed it down to Hermione, who jammed it in the lock and hauled the door open while the key struggled free and limped back into the air. The third chamber was a chessboard. A giant one, black and white stone squares stretching into the dark, the pieces tall as Hagrid, swords and maces resting on stone shoulders, and the far door visible only past the whole white army. "We have to play," Ron said, very quietly, and there was something new in his voice. Ron, outshone by Hermione in every class and outflown by Harry in the air, and outnumbered at home by 6 louder siblings, who had looked into the mirror of Erised and seen himself winning things he had never been allowed to want, walked onto that board and found the thing he was best at. He directed them like a general. He put Harry on a bishop and Hermione on a castle, and he took the place of a knight himself, and he played the white pieces with a cold, clear brilliance none of them had known he had, sacrificing piece after black piece to advance, the stone smashing stone around them, dust and chips of marble in the air. And then it came to the only move that would win, and it was a move that put Ron's knight where the White Queen would take it, and take it hard. "No," said Hermione, who had seen it a beat before he made it. "Ron, no, there has to be another." "There isn't," Ron said. He was pale and his hands shook on the hilt of his stone sword, and he did not look at them because if he looked at them he would not be able to do it. "It's chess, you've got to make sacrifices. I take one step forward and she takes me, and that leaves Harry free to checkmate the king." He swallowed. "It's the only way. Once she's taken me, Harry, you make your move, you go on, you understand. You and Hermione, you finish it." Ron, Harry started. Don't, Ron said, fierce, and for one moment he was looking right at both of them, and everything he could not say was in his face. You two go on. You always were going to be the two that went on. I've known it since the train. I don't mind it. I just like once to be the one that mattered. His mouth twisted. Let me matter. Move me forward. He moved himself forward. White Queen fell on his knight and struck him across the board, and he hit the stone and lay still. And Hermione screamed and started toward him, and Harry caught her, both arms around her, holding her back, because to step off her square mid-game was to forfeit and lose everything Ron had just spent himself to buy. He's alive, Harry said into her hair, hoping it, willing it. Hermione, look, he's breathing, he's just knocked out, but if we move now it's all for nothing. He did this so we could go on. We have to go on, we have to make it worth it. She stopped fighting him. She turned in his arms and looked at Ron lying small on the great board, and she pressed her face for 1 second against Harry's shoulder, and then she pulled back and wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, and her face came back together, brick by brick, because a friend had bought them a path with his body, and she was not going to waste it weeping. Harry stepped forward 3 squares and said, "Checkmate." The White King threw down his sword, the pieces parted. The way to the door stood open, and Ron lay behind them, breathing, and they could not carry him and could not stay. "We come back for him," Hermione said. "The second this is done, we come back for him, and we get him to the hospital wing, and I am going to tell him for the rest of his life that he was the one who mattered. Now go." The next room knocked them both back a step with the stench of it. A troll, far larger than the one at Halloween, already down, unconscious, a great lump rising on its head where something had already dealt with it. Whoever had come before them had not bothered to be clever. They climbed over the reeking thing and went on. The last chamber was the trap. The moment they crossed the threshold, flames roared up in the doorway behind them, purple, and flames roared up in the doorway ahead, black, sealing them in a stone room with a table in the middle. On the table stood 7 bottles of different shapes and sizes and a roll of parchment. Hermione read the parchment. She read it twice. And then, where Harry would have despaired, she sat down on the cold floor, pulled her knees up, and smiled the smile she saved for a problem worthy of her. Magic," she said. "It's logic, a puzzle. Half the greatest wizards alive haven't an ounce of logic. They would be stuck in here forever." She tapped each bottle as she worked it through, the riddle opening under her hands. Which were poison, which wine, which would carry you back through the purple flames, and which one, the smallest, would carry you forward through the black. There was just enough of the forward potion for one person. They both understood it at the same moment, and a silence fell in the burning room. "You should go back," Harry said, "through the purple. Get Ron, get to the owlery, send for Dumbledore. There's only enough of the forward one for one of us. You go back and bring help, and leave you to go on alone." She did not phrase it as a question. Her face had gone still, the deepest stillness she had. "After everything I said about standing alone, after I told you to your face that nobody survives anything by themselves, Hermione." He crouched down in front of her so they were eye to eye in the firelight. "Listen, if you come forward with me, there's no one to get help and no one to get Ron, and we both go to whatever's down there with no backup at all. If you go back, you save Ron and you bring Dumbledore, and that's the thing that wins this, not me playing the hero. I need you to be the one who goes for help, because you're the only one clever enough and steady enough to actually get it. That's not me sending you away. It's me trusting you with the part that matters most." She looked at him a long moment in the burning dark. She was 11 years old, and she was being asked to walk back alone through fire and leave her best friend to go on toward the thing that had killed his parents, and Harry watched her do the bravest thing he had ever seen anyone do, which was to decide he was right. "You drink it," she said, "and you go through, and you don't die." Her voice cracked clean across the middle, and she did not try to hide it. "Do you hear me, Harry Potter? Whatever's through there, you don't die, because I am going to bring help and you are going to be alive when it gets there. Promise me right now." "I promise," Harry said, and meant it as you mean a thing you have no power to guarantee. She threw her arms around him then, hard, the same as the bathroom, and held on, and Harry held her back, and then she pulled away and pressed a quick, fierce kiss to his cheek. The kind of kiss a child gives, the kind that means come back, and she scrubbed her own eyes furiously and said, right, I'm going," and she drank from the round bottle and walked into the purple fire and was gone toward Ron and the world above. Harry drank the smallest bottle. Ice ran through him head to foot. He walked into the black flames, and they did not burn, and he came out the other side into the last chamber, and he was alone, except he was not, because he carried every person who had got him this far behind his ribs where the fire could not reach. The room held only the mirror of Erised, and standing before it, the back of a turban he knew. "You," Harry said. Professor Quirrell turned, and he was not stammering now. "Yes," he said, "me. You were expecting Severus, I think." "A useful suspect, Snape, so very unpleasant. No one ever suspects peep worse than stuttering Professor Quirrell." The stutter came and went like a costume he was taking off. Harry's mind raced, putting it together backward. The broom curse Hermione had broken, Snape muttering not to curse him but to save him, the troll let in at Halloween, all of it Quirrell, all of it cover. And behind Quirrell the mirror stood gold and silent, and Quirrell turned back to it, baffled, because it showed him taking the stone and presenting it to his master, and it would not show him where the stone actually was. It It shows me what I desire, Quirrell muttered. I see myself holding the stone, but how do I get it? And then the other voice came. It came from nowhere, thin and cold and dreadful, and it came, Harry understood with a lurch, from Quirrell himself, from under the turban. Use the child, it said. Use the child. Quirrell rounded on Harry. Come here, Potter, look in the mirror and tell me what you see. Harry walked to the mirror because there was nothing else to do, and he looked, and his family was there as they had always been, and the girl at the edge of the frame, and his reflection smiled at him and reached into its pocket and drew out a blood-red stone and put it back, and in the same instant Harry felt a real weight drop into his real pocket, heavy and cool. The mirror had given the stone to the one person in the world who wanted to find it and not use it. He did not know how, he knew only to lie. I see myself, he said, shaking hands with Dumbledore. I've won the House Cup. He lies, hissed the cold voice. Let me speak to him, face to face. What happened after, Harry never told in full, not even to Hermione, not for years. Quirrell unwound the turban, and there was a face on the back of his head, chalk-white, red-eyed, flat-nosed, the face of the thing that had murdered his mother and father. It ordered him to give up the stone. Harry refused. It ordered Quirrell to seize him. Quirrell's hands closed on his wrist and his face, and where they touched the skin blistered and smoked, and Quirrell screamed because he could not bear to touch him. Harry, his scar splitting his skull, understood it without understanding it. Quirrell could not hold him. Touching him was anguish. He grabbed Quirrell's burning face with both hands and held on while Quirrell shrieked and crumbled to ash under his palms, and the pain in his own head rose past anything he had words for, and the room went white and then black, and the last thing he knew before the black took him was a cold scream of rage tearing out of the ruin of Quirrell and threw him and away, fleeing, defeated, and a single thought surfacing through the dark, clear and warm as the light through the third window. She kept her promise. You brought the help. I only have to last till it gets here. He let go and fell, and the dark closed over him like water over a stone. He woke to white ceiling, white sheets, a blaze of sunlight, and a small mountain of sweets on the table beside the bed taller than the one he'd woken to at Christmas. The hospital wing. And in the chair pulled close to the bed, asleep, sitting up with a book open in her lap and her head fallen sideways at an angle that was going to ache when she woke, was Hermione. He must have made a sound. Her eyes opened at once, snapping from dead asleep to wide awake with no stage in between, and she saw him looking at her, and her face did the thing it had done in the flooded bathroom, crumpling and recovering in the same instant. You're awake, she said. 3 days you've been asleep. I told them you'd wake. Madame Pomfrey kept saying we'll see in that voice, but I knew because you promised, and you don't break promises. You're annoying like that. Her words ran together, and her hands had found his on the blanket and gripped, and she was not letting go. Ron's fine. Concussion right as rain. He's been in every day eating your chocolate frogs. The stone's destroyed. Dumbledore turned back halfway to London the moment he understood it was a trick, came down through all of it and got to you, and you'd already done it. You held him off with your hands, Harry. You came back, Harry said. You went through the fire and you got Ron and you brought Dumbledore. You did the part that mattered. Hermione opened her mouth to argue because she always argued, and then she closed it because some things were too true to argue with, and she just held his hand and looked at him, and that was when the door opened and Dumbledore came in. He was glad to see Harry awake, and there was no performance in it. Harry had decided long ago to trust his sense of when a grown-up's welcome was real, and this one was. He sat in the second chair and answered Harry's questions, most of them, with the patience of a man who had been answering hard questions for 100 years. He told Harry why Quirrell could not touch him. Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. He does not realize that love as powerful as your mother's leaves its own mark, not a scar, no visible sign. To have been loved so deeply, even though the one who loved us is gone, gives us some protection forever. It is in your very skin. Dumbledore's blue eyes settled on Hermione's hand, still wrapped around Harry's on the white blanket, and stayed there a moment longer than the words required. Quirrell, full of hatred and ambition, sharing his soul with Voldemort, could not touch you for this reason. It was agony to him to touch a person marked by something so good. And Harry, 11 years old, bruised, alive, his hand in Hermione's, looked at the old man telling him that love had saved his life, and remembered the same old man in a dark room 3 months before, telling him to practice standing alone. He held both things in his head at once. He could not yet fit them together. But he had begun to understand that morning in the white sunlight that Albus Dumbledore was always 2 things at once, as the mirror was, a man who loved him and a man who had a use for him, and the second would not stop the first from being true, nor the first stop the second from being dangerous. Sir, Harry said, when you told me to learn to stand alone, did you mean it? Something passed over the old face. For a moment the grandfather was gone and only the general was there, a soldier who had fought one dark wizard already and could count the cost of the next one to the nut. I meant it as a kindness, Dumbledore said at last, which was not the same as no. I hope very much, Harry, that I was wrong too. He rose and wished them both well, and at the door he paused and looked back at the 2 children with their hands joined on the white blanket, and whatever he thought he kept behind the half-moon glasses, and he went out. I don't trust him, Hermione said the instant the door shut, fierce and quiet. I know he saved your life and he's the greatest wizard alive and everyone adores him. But I watched his face when he looked at us just now, and I'm telling you, Harry Potter, that man is keeping score and we are on the list and I don't yet know which column. She gripped his hand harder. Here's what I do know. Whatever's coming, whatever that cold voice comes back as, it will have to come through me to get to you. I decided it running through the dark to the Owlery alone because you sent me to do the part that mattered. I'm not going anywhere, not ever. Friendship and bravery, Harry said, and his throat went tight on the one feeling he let himself name that whole long year, which was happiness, plain and astonished, a boy who had wanted nothing for 10 years, lying bruised in a hospital bed, holding the hand of a girl who had run through fire for him and would do it again. At the end of year feast, the banners turned scarlet and gold, and Ron took his points for the best game of chess Hogwarts had seen in a century, and Hermione hers for cool logic under fire, and Harry his for pure nerve, and the great hall came apart with a roar he felt in his ribs. Hermione leaned across the din and straightened his glasses, 2 fingers to the bridge, the gesture automatic now. Term ends tomorrow, she said. I've written out my address for you, twice, in case you lose one. You will write back every week, Harry promised. Good. She sat back satisfied and turned to cheer for Ron, and Harry watched her do it, and the thought of the cupboard waiting in the morning had somehow lost its teeth. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The voice in the walls summer at Privet Drive measured itself in letters that did not come, and then in one that did. Harry had counted on the letters. Hermione had promised on the platform at King's Cross, holding both his hands and making him repeat the address back to her, that she would write every week, and Ron had clapped him on the shoulder and said he'd have him to stay before August was out. So Harry went back to the cupboard that was now a bedroom, the smallest one grudgingly because the Dursleys feared what the neighbors might think of a boy kept in a cupboard, and he waited. Nothing came, week after week, nothing. He watched the sky over the privet hedge for an owl that never arrived, and the old smallness crept back into him, the conviction he had spent a year unlearning, that he had imagined being wanted, that the table under the third window had been a thing that happened to some other, luckier boy. What he did not know, because a house elf named Dobby had been intercepting his post out of a misguided desire to keep him from a danger at school, was that the letters had come. Stacks of them. Hermione's in her cramped, urgent hand, 3 and 4 pages, growing more frantic each week as his silence stretched. The last one's not even about books but about him. Harry, why won't you write back? Are you all right? If I don't hear from you by Friday, I'm telling my parents I need to come and see for myself, and I will, I mean it. I have looked up the train. He learned all this later. He learned that she had, in fact, looked up the train. The rescue, when it came by flying car at 1 in the morning, Ron and the twins at the windows with a length of rope and a great deal of whispered swearing, prying the bars off Harry's window because their father had read in the paper about a boy locked up by Muggles, and Ron had put the rest together. They flew him to the burrow under a sky going pale at the edges, and Mrs. Weasley fed him until he could not move and scolded her sons until they wished they could not hear, and Harry stood in the warm chaos of that crooked house and understood that he had been collected, that people had noticed his silence and come for him, and it steadied something in him that Privet Drive had spent 6 weeks knocking loose. He stayed at the burrow for the rest of that summer, and it taught him things Privet Drive never had, that a house could be loud without being cruel, that Mrs. Weasley would put food in front of you whether you asked for it or not, a second helping if you were thin, a third if you were hairy, that you could fall asleep in a room with another person breathing nearby and not lie awake listening for the sound of a key in a lock. He degnomed the garden with Ron, swinging the leathery, indignant little creatures by their ankles and hurling them over the hedge until his arms ached. He flew a battered old broom around the orchard in the long gold evenings. He lost at wizard chess to Ron every single night and did not mind, because losing to a friend across a kitchen table was a kind of wealth no one had ever let him have, and he wrote to Hermione. He did it the first morning before anyone else was up, sitting on the edge of the camp bed in Ron's room with a borrowed quill, and he wrote 4 pages, which was 3 more than he had ever written to anyone in his life. He sent Hedwig off with it and watched her until she was a speck over the fields. The reply came back that same evening, Hedwig tapping at the window before the light had gone, and Hermione's letter ran 8 pages and began with the word finally underlined twice and ended, after a full accounting of everything she had read that summer, with a single line set apart at the bottom. I am very glad you're somewhere with people who feed you. Write again tomorrow. He wrote again tomorrow. He wrote every day after that, and so did she, until the owl knew the route by heart and Mrs. Weasley took to leaving out a dish of water for her, and the silence of June was undone, 1 day of ink at a time. He saw Hermione in Diagon Alley. She was coming out of Flourish and Blots with her parents, arms full of books, and she saw him across the cobbles, and the books went everywhere. She did not care about the books. She crossed the alley at a near run and stopped just short of him, and her hands came up and hovered, and then she took him by the shoulders and looked him over head to foot like a healer checking for breaks. You're thin, she said. You're thinner than June. Why didn't you write? I wrote every week. I wrote until I ran out of things that weren't just me asking why you weren't writing, and I was this close to coming to find you. I didn't get them, Harry said. Any of them. Someone was stopping my post. I thought he stopped. He had thought she'd forgotten him, and saying so out loud in the middle of Diagon Alley felt unbearably young. I thought maybe I'd got it wrong about this year, about having people. Hermione's face went through several things at speed and arrived somewhere fierce. You did not get it wrong, she said. You will never have got it wrong, do you hear me? If you ever stop hearing from me, it is because something has gone badly wrong and you should come looking, not because I've stopped. Honestly. As though she ran out, and instead of finishing, she straightened his glasses. 2 fingers to the bridge, the old motion and the alley and the year between them folded shut, and they were back at the 3rd window before either of them had said another word. The rest of Diagon Alley was noise. There was a man called Gilderoy Lockhart, the new defense teacher, all teeth in turquoise robes, who seized Harry for a photograph he had not agreed to. There was Draco Malfoy and his father, pale and sneering, and an ugly little scene by the bookshop till that ended with Mr. Malfoy slipping a battered black diary into the cauldron of Ron's small sister Ginny, who had a habit of going scarlet whenever Harry came within 10 feet of her, and whom none of them were watching closely enough. Harry noticed the sneer. He did not notice the diary. It would be a long time before he understood what he had failed to see and what it would cost. The troubles started at Halloween because the castle had a sense of occasion. They came back from nearly headless Nick's death day party into a corridor standing in an inch of water, and on the wall, painted in something that gleamed wet and red in the torchlight, words a foot high. The chamber of SCCRETS has been OPNED. Enemies of the air, beware. Beneath the message hung Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, stiff as a board, suspended by her tail from a torch bracket, not dead but not alive either, her eyes wide and fixed. The whole school saw it because the whole school was suddenly there, and the whole school saw who was standing closest to the writing when the teachers arrived. Harry Potter, who had a habit of turning up at the center of strange and terrible things. It got worse at the dueling club. Lockhart, who could not duel, set Harry against Malfoy to demonstrate, and Malfoy conjured a snake, and the snake reared to strike a Hufflepuff boy, and Harry, without thinking, told it to stop. Except that what came out of his mouth was not English. The low sequence of hisses, and the snake turned its head and listened to him, and the entire hall went silent and backed away, because Harry Potter was a Parselmouth, a speaker of snake tongue, and the last famous Parselmouth had been Salazar Slytherin himself, whose monster was loose in the castle. After that, the school decided. It was not a vote. It was the slow turning of 1,000 small backs. Conversations stopped when he came near. A first-year burst into tears in a corridor at the sight of him. Even Hufflepuffs, the kindest house in the school, crossed to the far wall when he passed, and a boy he had never spoken to told him to his face that everyone knew it was him, that he should just admit it. He went to meals and felt the room rearrange itself around the empty space he made. He had spent 10 years being treated like a thing that did not deserve to take up room, and the castle had given him 1 year of belonging before it handed the old verdict back to him, and the worst of it was how quickly he believed it, how readily the old smallness came when it was called. Hermione did not call it. She sat next to him at every meal that the rest of the hall left a gap around, close, her shoulder against his, talking in her ordinary voice about ordinary things, daring anyone with her posture to make something of it. She walked the corridors at his side with her chin up. When the Hufflepuff boy said everyone knew it was Harry, it was Hermione who turned on him, small and blazing, and said that everyone who thought Harry Potter would hurt a single student in this castle had clearly never met him and was welcome to come and say it to her face with their wand out, and the Hufflepuff who outweighed her by 3 stone went away. You don't have to do that, Harry said to her in the common room low after. Sit with me, make yourself a target, they'll start on you too. They started on me last year when I had no one, Hermione said. It was worse, this isn't worse. She was working as she said it, 3 books open, because she did not stop working even to defend a friendship. And I'm not doing it for you exactly. I'm doing it because it's true. You didn't open any chamber. You can talk to snakes, which is unusual and frankly fascinating, and I have 11 theories about how you came by it, but it doesn't make you Slytherin's heir. It makes you a boy something strange happened to as a baby, and I have known that since the train. She looked up at him. I know you, Harry. The whole castle can decide what it likes. I was there in the bathroom. I know exactly what you'll walk into a corridor full of danger for, and it isn't to hurt people. It's the opposite. So they can be wrong as loudly as they want. I'll be right where I am. There was a thing Harry did not have a word for, that lived under his ribs and grew whenever she did this, whenever she set herself between him and the whole turning world without being asked. He did not go looking for the word. He was 12. But he knew that whatever the castle thought of him, there was one person in it for whom his innocence was not a position to be argued, but a fact she had filed under settled, and that this was worth more than the good opinion of 1,000 strangers. Friendship and bravery, he said. Obviously, said Hermione, and turned a page. They found the bench in November when the castle had turned into a place to escape from rather than to be in. It stood at the edge of the black lake, half a ruin, one slat missing, set back beneath a beach where the path gave out and almost no one came. Hermione found it as she found everything, by going on past the point where other people stopped, and she brought Harry there on a gray afternoon when the stairs in the Great Hall had got to be too much even for her. They sat on the cold wood with their scarves pulled up to their chins and watched the lake heave slate-gray under a low sky, and for a long while neither of them spoke because the not speaking was the whole point of the place. "I was alone until I was 11, Hermione said at last to the water. "You know that, I don't think you know how much. I read because books never decided they didn't like me halfway through a sentence. I learned everything there was to learn because being right was the one thing I had that nobody could take off me. And then the letter came and I thought, a whole school, a whole hidden world, surely somewhere in the middle of all of it there will be one person." She pulled her chin further into her scarf, and there was, on the train, fixing a stranger's glasses, pretending a lucky guess about a toad. "So when the whole castle turns on you, Harry, and I sit down beside you anyway, I'm not being brave, whatever it looks like from the outside. I'm refusing to hand back the one thing I waited 11 years to find. They can think whatever they want. I am not going hungry again." Harry looked at the lake and then at the girl beside him who had just handed him the most private map she owned, and he understood that loyalty for Hermione was not a virtue she performed for an audience but a wound she was holding shut with both hands, and that she had decided to hold it shut around him. "You won't," he said, "go hungry whatever happens. You found me first, but I'm not going anywhere either, so that's settled." He bumped her shoulder with his friendship and bravery. She bumped him back harder and they stayed on the broken bench until the cold drove them indoors, and after that the bench belonged to them, as the third window did, a second country where the castle's verdict could not follow. It was Hermione who decided they would find out the truth themselves, since no adult would, and Hermione who built the plan because building plans was the thing she did, as natural to her as flight was to Harry. The plan was polyjuice potion. It would let two of them take the appearance of Slytherins for an hour, long enough to corner Malfoy in his common room and find out whether he was the heir. It was wildly against the rules. It required ingredients from the locked restricted section and a stolen one from Snape's private stores, and a month of brewing in the out-of-order girls' bathroom on the second floor, where a ghost called Moaning Myrtle wept in the U-bend and no living student ever went. Hermione laid it all out at the third window like a general planning a campaign, and Harry watched her be brilliant and dangerous and entirely unbothered by the scale of what she was proposing, and thought that the school had it exactly backward. The most reckless person in their year was not Harry, who merely spoke to snakes, but the girl who could not leave a question unanswered. She brooded herself mostly, hunched over the cauldron in Myrtle's bathroom for a month, stirring at odd hours, consulting the stolen book, and on the night they finally drank it, the plan worked and did not work. Harry and Ron took the shapes of two Slytherin boys and learned from Malfoy that he was not the heir, that he did not know who was, only that he wished them well, useful in its way. But Hermione did not come out of the stall where she had taken her own dose. Hermione. Harry knocked on the door, the potion wearing off, his own face coming back. "It's us, it's fine, Malfoy's not there, are you all right? Go away," came her voice, thick and miserable. "Just go away, I'm fine, I'll see you later." She was not fine. The hair she had plucked from a Slytherin girl's robe to add to her dose had not been human hair. It had been cat hair from the girl's cat, and polyjuice was not meant for animal transformations, and when Madame Pomfrey finally coaxed Hermione out and up to the hospital wing, she had a fur of fine gray down on her face, yellow eyes with slit pupils, and a tail, and she would not look at anyone, and she pulled the curtain round her bed and stayed behind it. Harry came every day. He came in the mornings before lessons and the evenings after, and he sat in the chair beside the curtained bed and did not try to look behind the curtain, because she had asked him not to, and he talked to her instead. He brought her the homework she was missing and read it through with her, her hand passing the corrected pages out through the gap in the curtain, her voice on the other side getting steadily less miserable as the days went on, because a problem to solve was the thing that brought Hermione back to herself, and Harry knew it and brought her problems. He brought her the gossip. He brought her once a chocolate frog and a get-well card Ron had drawn very badly, and a flower he'd talked Neville out of the greenhouse and pushed them one at a time through the gap, and heard her laugh on the other side, wet and surprised, the same laugh from the wreckage of the troll's bathroom. "You're being kind to me when I look like the inside of a hairball," her voice said on the fourth day from behind the curtain. "You sat next to me when the whole school thought I was a murderer," Harry said. "I think a few cat hairs is a fair trade." A silence behind the curtain. Then her hand came out through the gap, palm up open, an invitation he understood. He took it. They sat like that a while, a boy in a chair and a girl behind a curtain, holding hands through the gap, neither of them saying anything because some things did not need saying and they had both learned which ones. "I'm sorry the plan only half worked," she said at last. "Half a plan of yours is better than a whole one of anybody else's," Harry said, and felt her fingers tighten around his, and counted it, privately, among the best afternoons of a bad year. The cat hairs faded over a fortnight, and Madame Pomfrey let her out, and the only lasting trace was that Hermione swore she could ever after feel when someone was lying to her by a prickle at the back of her neck she blamed on the cat. Harry teased her about it once and she threw a quill at him, and the throwing of the quill, more than the laughing, told him she was properly herself again. What he did not tease her about was the thing he had understood across those 4 curtained afternoons, that he had spent them gladly. A year ago he would have called sitting in a hospital chair beside a sick friend a chore. Now he counted it the best hour of his day, the 1 hour he did not have to spend being all right for a castle that had decided he was a monster. Behind her curtain there was no verdict to perform against. There was only Hermione, half a cat and entirely herself, passing corrected homework out through the gap and laughing at Ron's terrible drawing, and Harry in the chair, for an hour at a time, simply a friend sitting with his friend, which the rest of that year tried very hard not to let him be. The attacks went on, a boy named Colin, petrified with his camera still raised. Then 2 at once, a Ravenclaw prefect and a Hufflepuff, and then worst, nearly headless Nick, a ghost petrified, which should not have been possible because you could not kill what was already dead. The school emptied as frightened parents took their children home. The corridors after dark were patrolled, the library hours cut, and a creeping dread settled over the castle that had nothing to do with the season. Hermione, restored to herself and out of the hospital wing, did the thing she always did with dread, which was to take it to the library and dismantle it. She had a theory. She would not say what it was until she was sure, because she hated to be wrong out loud, but Harry knew the signs, the late nights, the stack of books on magical creatures, the particular set of her jaw when she was closing in on an answer that frightened her. Whatever it is, she told him, it petrifies but doesn't kill, and Nick is dead already and it got him anyway, and Colin saw it through his camera and the prefect through a mirror she was holding round a corner, and those 2 details together are going to tell me what it is. I can feel it, I just need one more. She broke off, staring at nothing, the answer assembling behind her eyes. I need the library, I'll find you at dinner, don't go anywhere alone. He did not see her at dinner. He told himself she had lost track of time, which she did in the library when a problem had her. He told himself a dozen reasonable things and did not believe any of them, because Hermione Granger did not miss a meal she had named, and the dread that had settled over the castle reached into Harry's chest and closed its hand, and he was up and moving before McGonagall's voice cut across the hall to announce that there had been another attack, 2 more students taken, and that all pupils were to return to their houses at once. 2 students. He did not wait to hear the names. He pushed against the tide of frightened children pouring out of the hall, and he ran, because he knew, as you know, the worst thing before anyone tells you it, and his feet took him not to the houses but to the library, and to the 3rd window, and the chair was empty and her books were spread open across the table exactly as she left things when she meant to come back, and she had not come back. He found her in the hospital wing. They had laid her on a bed in the long row of the petrified, still as the rest of them, one arm raised in front of her face where she had thrown it up at the last second, her eyes open and fixed on a ceiling she could not see. Beside her on the bed lay the friend who had been taken with her, a Ravenclaw girl, and in Hermione's raised right hand, clutched even in petrifaction, was a small round mirror. Harry stood at the foot of the bed and could not make himself move closer. He had been afraid before. He had been afraid on a bucking broom and in a flooded bathroom and in a chamber under the school with Voldemort's face screaming out of the back of a man's head. This was not that. That fear had been fast and hot and had a thing to do at the end of it. This one was cold and had nowhere to go. There was no troll to leap on, no club to levitate, no door to run the wrong way down a castle toward. There was only Hermione, gone somewhere behind her own fixed eyes, her hand raised, her mirror lifted, and Harry standing at the end of the bed with both his own hands useless at his sides. He made himself go closer. He made himself take her raised hand, the one not holding the mirror, cold now, the fingers stiff. He had held that hand through a curtain 4 days into a bad year. He had held it on the lip of a trapdoor and through fire and in a hospital chair more than once. He held it now and it did not hold him back, and that was the thing that undid him, quietly at the foot of the bed where no one could see. Madame Pomfrey, gentle for once, told him the mandrake potion would be ready by spring, that everyone who had been petrified would be revived, that Hermione was not dead, was not in pain, would wake in a few months knowing no time had passed. It helped and it did not help. Spring was 100 years away. He sat with her until he was made to leave, and at the door he looked back at the raised hand and the lifted mirror, and something in the arrangement snagged at him. Some last thing she had been trying to tell him even as the worst happened, and he could not yet read it, and he carried it out of the hospital wing like a stone in his shoe. He read it 3 nights later, sitting up in the dark, because grief in Harry had always turned itself into motion, and the only motion left was to finish what she had started. He went back to her in the hospital wing. He sat by the petrified bed and he looked at the raised hand and the lifted mirror, and he thought about a girl who, with whatever was coming up the corridor behind her, had not screamed and had not run but had reached for a mirror, because Hermione Granger at the end had still been solving the problem. The mirror meant she had worked out you must not look the thing in the eye. She had been checking the corner ahead with the glass so she would not meet its gaze directly. She had armed herself with the answer in the last second she had, and then he noticed her other hand, the fist, and the corner of paper crushed inside it that the teachers had missed, and he worked it gently free. It was a page torn from a library book, an old page, and on it a drawing of an enormous serpent in a column of close print, and across the bottom, in Hermione's cramped, urgent hand, the words she had written before she ran out of time to tell him, "Pipes." He read the page. "A basilisk, the king of serpents, spiders flee before it. Its gaze kills outright, but those who see it indirectly, through water, through a reflection, through a ghost or a camera, are only petrified. And it moves through the castle," Hermione had understood, "through the one network that reached every floor and every bathroom and would let a great serpent travel unseen, the pipes, the plumbing." She had cracked the entire mystery alone in a library and torn the proof out of a book and folded it into her fist, and even struck down she had kept hold of it as she kept hold of everything that mattered, so that whoever found her would find the answer too. She had armed him. From inside her own stillness she had reached forward and put the weapon in his hand. "Thank you," Harry said to the raised hand in the lifted mirror. I've got it now, hold on, spring isn't far." It was that same night that the writing appeared on the wall a second time, and a new line beneath it, "Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever." A student had been taken down into the chamber itself, and the student was Ginny Weasley. After that it moved fast, the way the worst things do, no time to be afraid properly. Harry and Ron found the entrance where Hermione's page had told them it would be, in the second-floor bathroom where Moaning Myrtle wept, a bathroom they knew, because Hermione had brewed a month of polyjuice in it. A tap with a serpent scratched on its side, a sink that was no sink. Harry spoke to it in the snake tongue the school had hated him for, and the entrance ground open onto a black pipe dropping into the dark under the school. Lockhart came with them because they had dragged him along to do the brave thing he had spent his career pretending to have done, and Lockhart, exposed at last as a fraud who had stolen other men's deeds and wiped their memories, tried to wipe theirs instead with Ron's broken wand, and the spell rebounded and blew out his own mind and brought half the tunnel down between Harry and Ron in the same instant. Ron, on the far side of the rockfall, unhurt, his wand useless. Harry on the near side alone with the way forward open. "Wait there," Harry called through the rubble. "Clear a gap if you can, I'm going on, I'll find her." "Harry," Ron's voice cracked on it, his sister somewhere ahead in the dark. "She's 11, she's just get her. Whatever's down there, get her and bring her back." So Harry went on alone, except he was not alone, because he carried Hermione's page in his pocket and Hermione's understanding in his head, and every step he took down that pipe he took with her. Don't meet its eyes, it travels in the plumbing, spiders flee before it, see it only in reflection. She had walked into the hospital wing's long stillness, and she walked beside him now anyway, the cleverest thing in the castle, riding in the answers she had left him. The Chamber of Secrets was a long stone hall lined with serpent pillars, and at the far end, beneath a vast carved face, lay Ginny Weasley, white and still, not yet petrified but fading, and over her stood a tall, handsome boy of perhaps 16, faint at the edges, watching Harry come with a cold and curious smile. He gave his name as Tom Riddle. He had come out of the diary, he explained, the diary Ginny had poured her whole heart into all year, never knowing it was pouring back, draining her, using her small hands to open the chamber and write on the walls and set the monster loose. He had taken her life a drop at a time to make himself solid again, and now there was almost enough of her gone, and almost enough of him returned, and Tom Riddle, he told Harry, rearranging the letters of his name in fire on the air, was Lord Voldemort, or had been, or would be, the child the monster had grown from. "You'll forgive me," Riddle said, "if I find it hard to believe that you, a thin boy with a borrowed wand and a dead girl's research in his pocket, are the one who undid the greatest wizard in the world." "I had help," Harry said. "I always have help, that's the part you've never understood." Riddle laughed and called the basilisk. What happened in the chamber Harry would tell Hermione every word of later, because there were no secrets he kept from her, and because he wanted her to know exactly how much of it had been hers. He told her how he had shut his eyes the instant the serpent came, because she had taught him not to look, how he had fought a 60-foot snake blind, by sound and by feel, in a flooded chamber, while Riddle laughed and urged the monster on. How Phoenix had come to him out of nowhere, Dumbledore's Phoenix, Fawkes, sent to one who had shown the school real loyalty, and had torn out the basilisk's killing eyes with its talons so that Harry could open his own. How the Phoenix had dropped the sorting hat into his hands, and the hat had given up a sword, ruby-hilted, Gryffindor's own, and Harry had driven it up through the roof of the serpent's mouth and into its brain, taking a poisoned fang through his own arm as it died. He told her how he had pulled the fang from his arm with the venom already burning toward his heart, and how he had understood in the last clear moment what to do with it, the diary. Riddle had come out of the diary, and the diary was the thing keeping him solid while Ginny faded. Harry had taken the fang, dripping with basilisk venom, and driven it into the heart of the book. Riddle had screamed and come apart, ink pouring from the wounds in the diary like black blood, and the handsome, fading boy had thrown back his head and been torn into nothing, and across the chamber Ginny Weasley had gasped and opened her eyes and sat up, her color coming back alive. Harry had not been. The venom had reached his arm to the elbow and was climbing, and he had sat down on the wet stone beside the dead serpent and thought, with a strange calm, that he was glad Ginny would walk out of here, and glad Ron would have his sister back, and sorry only for one thing, which was that he had promised a petrified girl that spring was not far, and he was not going to be there in spring to see her wake. And then the phoenix had laid its head against the wound on his arm and wept, and phoenix tears are the one cure for basilisk venom, and the burning had cooled and stopped and reversed, and Harry had lived. He told Hermione all of it. He left out only one thing, which was the thought he'd had while the venom climbed, the single regret because he was 12 and did not yet have anywhere to put it, but he kept it, folded small, as she kept things folded in her fist. Spring came early to one bed in the hospital wing, because Dumbledore was not a man to make a boy wait for mandrakes once the chamber was sealed, and the moment the restorative draught was ready Harry was there. He was there when they gave it to her. He stood at the foot of the bed where he had stood for months and watched the gray leave her, watched the stiffness go out of the raised arm, watched her chest rise on a real breath, and watched Hermione Granger come back into her own face, blinking, confused, the mirror still in her hand and her last thought still mid-sentence, because to her no time had passed at all. "Pipes," she said to the ceiling. "Harriet travels in the pipes, you have to," and then she saw where she was, and the season wrong outside the windows, and Harry at the foot of her bed gone thinner and older than when she had last seen him, and she understood that she had lost a piece of the year and that he had not. "It's over," Harry said. "You worked it out. The page, the mirror, the pipes, all of it, you had all of it. You put the answer in my hand before you, and I finished it. We finished it. Ginny's safe. The diary's destroyed. Over, and you're awake, and it's spring." Hermione looked at him for a long moment, taking the measure of everything that had happened in the months she had missed, reading it off his face as she read everything, and then she did a thing she had only done twice before in a flooded bathroom in a burning room. She got out of the bed on legs that did not quite work yet, and she crossed the space between them, and she put her arms around him and held on. "You did it without me," she said into his shoulder. "I never do anything without you," Harry said. "You were in my pocket the whole way down. You were the only reason I knew not to look it in the eye. Riddle thought I'd beaten Voldemort once as a baby and got lucky, and that was all there was to me. I told him he'd never understood the thing that actually does it." He pulled back enough to look at her. "It's you, the thing he can't account for. It's having people. It's you leaving me the answer even when you couldn't be there. He'll never see it coming because he can't imagine it. He thinks everybody's as alone as he is." She held onto his sleeve as she had on the boat in their first week, and she did not let go, and the hospital wing was loud around them with other students waking and other reunions, the Ravenclaw girls sitting up, Colin reaching for his camera, the whole long row of the lost coming back to life at once. Dumbledore sent for Harry that evening, alone. His office was full of strange whirring instruments and a perch where the phoenix sat, smaller now, freshly burned and reborn from its own ashes, watching Harry with bright black eyes. The headmaster heard the whole story and praised him and meant the praise, but there was a question under it that Harry had learned by now to listen for. "You went down into that chamber alone," Dumbledore said, knowing what waited. "That took a kind of courage I have rarely seen in a wizard 3 times your age." He folded his long hands. "And yet I notice, Harry, that you keep saying we. You did not face the serpent alone, you tell me. You carried Miss Granger's research. You were aided by Fawkes, who comes only to those of proven loyalty. You speak of your victory as a thing shared out among a great many people, most of whom were not in the room." The blue eyes were kind and steady and watching. "It is a generous habit. I wonder sometimes whether it is also a dangerous one. There may come a time when the burden is yours and yours alone, when there is no one in your pocket and no phoenix in the air, and I should not like you to have grown so used to being carried that you cannot stand on the bare ground when it comes to that." Harry looked at the old man who had sent the phoenix that saved his life, and who was in the same breath advising him to need people less. "With respect, sir," Harry said, and was surprised by his own steadiness, "I think you've got it backward. I didn't survive down there because I'm used to being carried. I survived because I had something worth coming back for. Riddle was alone. He's always been alone. He told me so. He was proud of it. And he lost to a 12-year-old with a dead girl's notes in his pocket because the 12-year-old wasn't alone and couldn't imagine wanting to be." He met the blue eyes. "If the day comes that it's only me, I'll stand on the bare ground, sir, but I'll be standing on it for them. That's not a weakness you can train out of me. It's the only reason I'm still here." Something moved behind the half-moon glasses, and for a moment the general and the grandfather looked at Harry out of the same face and could not seem to agree with each other. "I hope you are right," Dumbledore said at last. "I have built a great many plans, Harry, on the assumption that you are wrong." He said it almost too quietly to hear, and then he smiled, the grandfather again, and sent Harry down to the feast, where the mandrakes had been turned into a banquet, and the school that had turned its back on him in the autumn cheered him in the spring, fickle as weather. Harry did not much care about the cheering. He had learned what it was worth. He went down the long table to the place where a girl had saved him a seat, and she had a stack of his missed homework waiting and a great many questions about the chamber she intended to have answered in full, and he sat down beside her in the noise and reached over and straightened a strand of her hair that had fallen across her face, because she had spent a year fixing things of his and he had finally learned to fix one of hers. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The dog and the map. The thing about the third year was that the danger, for once, came looking for Harry before he had done anything to deserve it. It found him on the train before the castle before a single lesson. The Hogwarts Express had been racing north through a darkening afternoon when it shuddered and slowed and stopped dead in open country, the lamps going out one by one, frost spreading across the inside of the windows like a living thing. Then the cold came. Not the cold of weather, a cold that reached past the skin and into the place where a person keeps the memory of every good thing, and started taking them out one by one and putting out their lights. A figure had come gliding down the corridor outside their compartment, tall, hooded, its breath a long dry rattle, a hand the color of a drowned man's reaching for the door. A Dementor, though Harry did not yet know the word for it. It looked into the compartment and it found Harry and it stayed. What happened to Harry then was not fainting, though it looked like fainting. He heard a woman screaming far off and very near at once, a woman begging, "Not Harry, please not Harry, take me instead," and he understood in the part of him that was sinking that he was hearing his mother die, that the Dementor had reached into him and pulled out the worst thing he owned and made him live inside it. The world tipped, the cold closed over his head. He came back to a compartment full of light and a bar of chocolate being pressed into his hand by a shabby man in patched robes who had not been there before, and to Hermione kneeling on the floor in front of him with both her hands wrapped around his free one, white-faced, saying his name like she had been saying it for a while. "Eat the chocolate," the shabby man said. "It helps, I promise." He had driven the thing off, whatever it was, with a spell and a word, and now he stepped back into the corridor to deal with the others, leaving the three of them alone, and Harry sat shaking with chocolate melting in his fist and Hermione's grip, the only fixed point in a tilting world. "You went gray," Hermione said. Her voice was not steady, and she was not trying to make it steady, which was its own kind of steadiness. "You went gray and your eyes rolled back and you were just gone, Harry. You were gone somewhere I couldn't follow, and I have read about a great many dark things and I had no idea what was happening, and that has never once happened to me before, not knowing." She pressed his hand between both of hers. "Eat the chocolate now, and then you're going to tell me what you heard, because something took you somewhere when it looked at you, and I'm not letting you carry whatever it was on your own." He ate the chocolate. Warmth spread out from his middle and pushed the cold back to the edges. And then he told her low what he had heard, the screaming, the begging, the voice he had no memory of but knew in his bones, and Hermione did not flinch and did not look away and did not tell him it was only a spell. She held his hand and let it be exactly as terrible as it was, and when he had finished she said, "That's the worst thing I've ever heard," which was the right thing, the only right thing, and Harry understood that being believed about the size of a wound was its own kind of medicine, and that she had learned to give it to him without being taught. The shabby man turned out to be Professor Lupin, the new defense teacher, and he changed the shape of the year. Lupin taught the way no teacher Harry had ever met taught. He taught as though the thing in front of you mattered more than the curriculum, as though a frightened student was a person to be steadied rather than a grade to be assigned. He learned all their names the first week. He noticed things. He noticed that Neville flinched when Snape was mentioned and built a whole lesson around letting Neville defeat a boggart wearing Snape's face in a dress, and the class laughed and Neville walked taller for a month. He noticed that Harry alone of the third years had been hollowed by the Dementor on the train, and he did not make a spectacle of it, but he found Harry one evening after class and said, quietly, that if Harry wanted, he would teach him to fight the things himself. So Harry's Thursday evenings became the Patronus lessons, and the Patronus lessons became, without either of them naming it, something closer to what Harry imagined having a father might be. The Patronus is a kind of positive force, Lupin explained, in an empty classroom with a boggart shut in a trunk to stand in for the real thing. A projection of the very things the Dementor feeds on: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. To conjure it you must fix your mind on a single, very happy memory, the strongest you have, and not a thin happiness, Harry, not "I got a good mark." The Dementor will eat that in a second. It must be a memory with something underneath it. Something you would not give up. Harry tried his first broom ride, the lift of it. The silver mist came and guttered and died. He tried the moment he learned he was a wizard, that he was leaving the Dursleys. Better, but it broke apart under the boggart Dementor's cold. "It's not enough," Lupin said, not unkindly. "Those are escapes. Happiness, that's really just the absence of something bad. The Patronus wants the presence of something good. Reach further." Harry shut his eyes in the cold and reached, and what his mind closed on was not a broom or a letter. It was a flooded bathroom and a club hanging in the air and a soaked, terrified girl planting her feet and getting the charm exactly right, and afterward in the wreckage, the two of them not knowing what to say and her voice steadying on three words that had become the shape of his whole life since: friendship and bravery. I shan't forget it. It was the discovery at 11 that he was wanted. It was every letter that had crossed England that summer and every meal where a seat was saved. It was a hand through a hospital curtain, palm up. Expecto Patronum, Harry said, and the room filled with light. It was not a full Patronus, not yet, but it was enormous, a great silver cloud that drove the boggart Dementor back into its trunk and slammed the lid, and Lupin stood very still in the silver glow, looking at Harry with an expression Harry could not read. That was a strong memory, Lupin said. It was a good one, said Harry. Lupin was quiet a moment. Your father, he said carefully, could produce a Patronus that took a single solid shape. It was a well. It's not my story to tell you yet, perhaps, but I'll say this. The wizards who cast the strongest Patronuses I have ever seen were not the most powerful. They were the ones who had the most to lose and knew it, and had decided it was worth the risk anyway. Whatever you reach for just now, Harry, hold on to it. It's the most dangerous and the most valuable thing you will ever own. Harry told Hermione about the lessons, all of them except which memory he had reached for, and she did not ask, because she had her own things she did not say, and they had built between them an honest country with a few small locked rooms in it, and trusted each other not to force the doors. There was one Thursday, after the Patronus had finally taken its full shape and the lesson was really over, that Lupin made them both a cup of tea on a little spirit stove in the corner of the empty classroom, and told Harry about his parents. He had not meant to, Harry thought. It came out sideways, as the most important things did with adults who had lost too much to say them straight. Lupin had known James and Lily at school. He had been one of a group of four, he said, 4 boys who would have died for each other, and one of whom in the end had done the opposite. He told Harry that James Potter had been arrogant and brave and ferociously loyal, that he had loved Lily Evans for years before she would look at him, and had become, by loving her, a better man than he might otherwise have been. He told Harry that Lily had been clever and kind and unafraid, that she had stood up for the friendless when it cost her, that she had a temper and a laugh you could hear across a courtyard. You have her eyes, Lupin said. Everyone tells you that, I expect, but it is truer than they know. She looked at people like she was deciding to be on their side and meaning it. You do that, you did it to Neville with the boggart. You did it just now, thanking me for the tea like it was a gift instead of a tea bag. He turned his cup in his hands. I knew your parents when they were younger than you will believe, Harry, and I think they would have liked who you are, not the famous one, this one, the one with the enormous Patronus he will not tell me the secret of. Harry drank his tea and did not trust his voice for a moment, because he had spent his whole life with no one to tell him a single true thing about the people who had made him, and here was a teacher handing them back to him a piece at a time across a chipped cup and asking nothing for it. It was the nearest thing to a family at a kitchen table that Harry had known, and he understood, sitting there, why Hermione fought so hard to keep what she had found. You did not let go of this. Once someone had shown you what a warm room felt like, the cold one became unbearable and worth any amount of fighting to stay out of. She had more locked rooms than usual that year, and Harry watched the strain of them with growing alarm. It started with her timetable, which was impossible. She was taking every subject the third year offered, more subjects than there were hours in the week to attend them, and somehow she attended all of them. Harry saw her go into arithmancy, and he was nearly certain into divination at the same hour on the other side of the castle. She turned up to classes she could not have reached. She answered questions in 2 subjects scheduled against each other, and seemed honestly unaware there was anything to explain, and she was fraying. She was pale and short-tempered in a way that was not like her, snapping at Ron over nothing, falling asleep over her books at the third window with gray smudges under her eyes, carrying a weight Harry could see in the set of her shoulders without being able to name its source. You're going to make yourself ill, Harry told her one night, taking a quill gently out of her hand because she had fallen asleep holding it. Whatever you're doing, whichever way you're doing it, no mark is worth this, no subject. You look like I felt on the train. I'm fine, she said, which was a lie, and they both knew it was a lie, and she let him see that she knew, which was the closest she could come, under whatever oath she was keeping, to telling him the truth. I can manage. I have always been able to manage. I know you can manage, Harry said. That's not the question. The question is whether you should have to. You don't have to carry everything alone just because you're able to. That's the thing you taught me, Hermione. You walked through fire and got Ron and brought Dumbledore because I trusted you with the part that mattered. So trust me back. Even if you can't tell me what it is, let me carry the part of it that's just being tired. Sit here, sleep. I'll wake you before Pince throws us out. I'll do that much, since you won't let me do more. She looked at him for a long moment, and then instead of arguing, she put her head down on her folded arms on the table and let herself sleep, which from Hermione Granger was an act of trust on the scale of a confession. And Harry sat beside her in the lamplight at the third window and kept watch over a girl who kept watch over the whole world and did not ask what she was carrying and carried it with her anyway, in the only way she would allow. He found out eventually, of course. She told him herself at the end when the secret had a use. A time turner given to her by the school so a 13-year-old could take every class at once, an hourglass on a chain that let her live the same hours twice. She had been running the year double, sleeping half as much as a person needs, aging faster than her friends in a quiet, private way no one had thought to ask whether a child should be asked to bear. It made Harry angry in a cold, controlled fashion he was learning from Hermione herself, the anger of a person who notices that the adults in charge keep handing impossible loads to children and calling it an honor. But that came later. What came first was Sirius Black. The castle that year lived under the shadow of a name. Sirius Black, the wizard who had broken out of Azkaban, the wizard prison no one had ever escaped, was loose, and the word from every fearful adult was that he was coming to Hogwarts, that he was coming for Harry. The Dementors ringed the school to catch him. The fat lady's portrait was slashed one night by a knife. Black got into the castle, into Gryffindor Tower itself, and stood over Ron's bed with a blade and fled. Harry pieced the story together as he pieced everything together with Hermione at the third window, from fragments overheard and books pulled down, and the things adults said when they thought children were not listening. Sirius Black had been his parents' friend, their closest friend. He had been made Harry's godfather in the old days before everything. And he had, the story went, betrayed the Potters to Voldemort, told the Dark Lord where they were hiding, and then when the smallest of their other friends, Peter Pettigrew, had confronted him in a street, Black had blown Pettigrew and 12 bystanders to pieces with a single curse, leaving nothing of Pettigrew but a finger, and laughed when they took him away. "Your godfather," Hermione repeated when Harry told her, and she went very still. "They made him your godfather." And then she did not finish. She reached across the table and put her hand over Harry's because there were some wounds you did not dress with words, only with a hand. "I'm sorry, that's to have had someone who was meant to be yours and to have him be the one who—" She stopped again. "I hate it for you, I just hate it." Harry turned his hand over under hers and held on. "I never had him," he said. "You can't lose what you never had. I had the Dursleys in a cupboard." This is just a name. But it was not just a name, and Hermione knew it was not just a name, because a godfather was a thing a person was supposed to have, a door that was supposed to lead somewhere warm, and the discovery that the door led only to a murderer was a particular cruelty, and she sat with him in it and did not pretend it was smaller than it was. What neither of them knew that winter at the third window was that almost every part of the story was a lie. They would learn the truth in a single violent night at the end of the year, in a shrieking shack at the end of a tunnel under a tree that tried to kill them, and the truth would be better and worse than anything the rumors had managed. But before that there was Hogsmeade in the snow and a stolen afternoon. Harry had no permission to visit the village because he had no guardian who would sign the form, the Dursleys having refused out of spite. So he went under his father's cloak, and Hermione, who disapproved on principle and came anyway, walked beside an empty stretch of air down the white lane, talking to a friend nobody else could see, and the two of them spent an afternoon that Harry kept afterward in the same locked room as the Troll Knight. Butterbeer in a warm pub, snow falling on the high street, Hermione buying him an enormous bag of sweets from Honeydukes and refusing to be thanked. Sitting close together on a wall above the shrieking shack while she told him about her parents, dentists, baffled and proud, who kept his letters in a drawer because their daughter's best friend was famous in a world they could not see. For a few hours there was no Dementor and no escaped murderer and no time-turner grinding her down. There was just the two of them in the snow, and Harry invisible to everyone in the world except the one person he most wanted to be seen by, which felt, he thought, like a fairly accurate map of his whole life. "I can see you, you know," Hermione said apropos of nothing, watching the snow. "Even under the cloak, I always know where you are. I don't know how, I just do." She tucked her gloved hand into the crook of his invisible arm. "It's the most useful magic I've got, and it isn't even in any book." "Don't tell Madame Pince," Harry said. "She'll want to catalog it." Hermione laughed, and the snow came down, and somewhere under the frozen ground beneath the shrieking shack a half-truth waited to be turned over, but not yet, not that afternoon. That afternoon was theirs. Winter wore on, and the three of them kept to their places. The third window for the work, the broken bench by the lake for the things that were not work. They went down to the bench on the last Saturday before the holidays, all three of them, and sat in a row with the lake frozen at its rim, and Ron, who had spent 2 years a half-step behind the pair of them and made his peace with it, said the thing none of them had said out loud. "You two are going to get yourselves killed one of these years," he said, not unkindly. "Down trapdoors, into chambers, turning up wherever the trouble is. And I have worked out my job, in case you were wondering. Somebody has to be the one who notices you have gone missing and raises the castle. Somebody has to be at the top of the stairs with the rope." He skipped a stone out across the ice. "That is me. I am the one who comes after you. I made my peace with not being the clever one or the good on a broom one. I am the loyal one. Turns out that is a job too. It is the most important one," Hermione said with the fierceness she kept for true things. "You played a whole board with your own body so we could go on, Ron. Do not ever call that second place." Harry said nothing for a moment, looking at the two of them, the friend who built the plans and the friend who came after, and thought that a year ago he had owned nothing and now he owned this, a broken bench by a frozen lake and two people who had decided to be his. The Dementors could drag whatever they liked out of him on a train. They would never reach the bottom of this because this was newer than the screaming and it was winning. He said as much, roughly, badly, not finding the words for it, and Hermione understood it as the answer to her Patronus question without letting him see that she had, and Ron skipped another stone, and the cold drove them indoors, and the bench held its place by the lake for the spring. The truth came out at the end of June, and it came out fast. It began with Ron's rat. Scabbers, the fat gray rat Ron had owned for years, the one that had ridden in his pocket on the train the day the three of them met, had been sickening all year and vanishing and reappearing. And on the last night of term a great black dog, the size of a small horse, came out of the dark by the lake, seized Ron by the leg, and dragged him bodily into a gap in the roots of the whooping willow, the violent tree that guarded a tunnel no one had ever explored. Harry and Hermione went in after him without a second's hesitation, because Ron was theirs and the dog had him, and they came out the far end into the Shrieking Shack, the most haunted building in Britain, which was not haunted at all and never had been. The dog was Sirius Black. He was an animagus, a wizard who could become an animal at will, and the gaunt, wild-haired, hollow-eyed man who rose from the shadows of that ruined room was the most wanted criminal in the wizarding world, and he was looking at Harry with an expression that was not murder. What followed was the strangest hour of Harry's life to that point, an hour in which everything he had been told turned over and showed its other face. Lupin came through the tunnel after them, and Lupin and Black were old friends, and the two of them together forced the truth out into the open. Sirius Black had not betrayed Harry's parents. The Potters had changed their secret keeper at the last minute in secret from Sirius to the small, forgettable Peter Pettigrew, precisely because everyone would assume it was Sirius. Pettigrew had been the traitor. Pettigrew had sold the Potters to Voldemort. And when Sirius had hunted him down in the street, it was Pettigrew who had shouted his accusation for the whole world to hear, blown apart the street with a curse of his own, cut off his own finger, and transformed into a rat to vanish into the sewers, leaving Sirius to take the blame and the prison and 12 years among the Dementors for a murder that was the murderer's own escape. The rat was Scabbers. Pettigrew had spent 12 years as a Weasley family pet, sleeping in the house of the people who had loved James Potter, biding his time, and Harry stood in the Shrieking Shack and watched a fat, balding little man be dragged out of a rat's shape, wringing his hands, weeping, begging the son of the friend he had betrayed to spare his life. "You should have realized," Sirius said, gaunt and shaking. "If Voldemort didn't kill you, we would, together. That's how it should be." And Harry, who had every reason in the world to let them, did not. "No," he said. He stepped between the two grown wizards and the cringing creature on the floor, and his voice did not shake, though everything in him wanted Pettigrew dead. "Not because he deserves to live. He doesn't. But my dad wouldn't have wanted his two best friends to become murderers over him. And I'm not going to start my life with my godfather by watching him do the thing he went to Azkaban for not doing. We hand him to the Dementors, we hand him to the law. He lives in a cell and you go free because the truth walks out of this room with him alive to tell it." He looked at Sirius. "I've waited my whole life for somebody to belong to. I'm not having you sent straight back to prison the same night I find out you're innocent. Keep him alive and you get to be my godfather. That's the trade, take it." Sirius looked at the thin boy with his dead friend's face and his dead friend's mercy, and something broke open in the gaunt ruin of him, and he lowered his wand. Afterward, Harry would understand that this was the moment he had chosen the year's whole meaning. Hermione understood it before he did. She had been standing back against the wall through all of it, wand ready, saying almost nothing, watching Harry with an intensity he felt on his skin, and when he made his choice she let out a breath she had been holding for an hour, and the look she gave him then was one he would carry a long time because it was not surprise. It was recognition. She had known he would choose mercy. She had bet the night on it. They might have walked out of the shack of family that night, the lot of them, the innocent godfather and the witnesses and the proof, but the moon came out. Lupin was a werewolf. He had forgotten his potion in the chaos, and the full moon found him in the open, and the teacher who had taught Harry to fight his own despair convulsed and twisted and became a thing that did not know its friends, and in the confusion of the transformation Pettigrew seized a fallen wand, became a rat, and was gone into the grass, and the truth that would have freed Sirius ran down a hole and disappeared. And then it got worse because the commotion drew the Dementors, and the Dementors came across the grounds toward the lake in their hundreds, and the cold came down, and Harry and Hermione and an exhausted, half-mad Sirius were caught in the open by the water with the things closing in. Harry tried the Patronus. He reached for the troll knight for the silver memory, but there were 100 of them and only one of him, and he was 13, and the cold was eating the memory faster than he could hold it. He felt Hermione collapse against his side, felt himself going down, heard the screaming begin again, far off and near. And at the very edge of the dark across the lake he saw something impossible, a single blazing silver light, a Patronus in the shape of a great stag, galloping across the water, driving the whole horde of Dementors back before the dark took him completely. He woke in the hospital wing, and the night was not over. It had only folded back on itself. Because Sirius had been caught after all, dragged back to the castle and locked in a tower room to await the Dementor's kiss, the fate worse than death, the sucking out of the soul. Pettigrew was gone, the only proof of innocence with him. By every law and every witness the world would accept, Sirius Black would be dead by midnight, and Harry's one chance at a family would be a murderer again in the eyes of everyone who mattered. And Hermione had a time-turner. Dumbledore came to the hospital wing, said a number of careful, sideways things that were not quite instructions, mentioned that a great deal could be done in 3 turns of an hourglass, and that Sirius was locked in the westernmost tower, and that they would do well to hurry, and that he was, in this matter, going to be looking very firmly the other way. Then he left, and Hermione pulled the gold chain over both their heads and turned the little hourglass 3 times, and the hospital wing rushed away backward, and they were standing in an empty entrance hall 3 hours in the past, with 3 hours to undo a catastrophe. "This is how I've been everywhere at once all year," Hermione said, fast, businesslike, the fraying gone out of her now that the load had a purpose. "I'm not supposed to use it for this. We are breaking about 9 laws. But Dumbledore as good as told us to, and we are going to save 2 innocent lives with it, and I have decided that is what it was always for." She gripped his hand. "We do this together. We do not separate, we do not change anything we don't have to, and we do not let our past selves see us, because I have read about what happens when wizards meddle with time, and it is uniformly horrible. Stay with me. Move when I move. Do you trust me?" "Always," said Harry, and meant it as the simplest fact he owned. So they lived the night a second time, hand in hand, from the outside. They freed Buckbeak the Hippogriff from his unjust execution and hid him, so there would be a creature with wings waiting later. They crept through the grounds in the dark, watching their own past selves blunder toward the shrieking shack, having to stand by and not interfere while the past version of the night ran its terrible course. And when it came to the lake, to the moment 100 Dementors had closed in on a 13-year-old who could not hold his memory long enough to save himself, Harry understood at last what he had seen across the water. There had been no rescuer. The blazing stag had not come from anyone else. It had come from him, from this Harry, the one standing now across the lake watching his past self fall. He had seen himself. He stepped out to the water's edge, and he raised his wand, and he did not reach this time for a thin and failing happiness. He reached for the whole of it at once, the troll and the letters and the hand through the curtain and the snow and Hogsmeade and the girl beside him now in the dark who had turned time itself inside out to give a murderer's victim back his name, and the memory was not a single moment anymore. It was the shape of everything he had built since he was 11, and it was the most unkillable thing in him. EXBCTOPATRONUM. The stag burst out of his wand at full gallop, vast and silver and solid, lowered its great antlers and drove the entire host of Dementors back across the lake and away, and the cold broke and the night turned, and across the black water Harry watched his past self stir and live. Hermione was looking at him in the silver glow with both her hands pressed over her mouth. "That's the biggest one Lupin's ever seen cast by anyone," she said when she could speak. "He told me. A full corporeal Patronus at 13. Harry, what do you think about when you cast it? It has to be the strongest happy memory you have. What is it?" And Harry, with the stag's light fading around them and the stolen night winding toward its rescue, looked at her, and for the first time he thought about telling her the true answer, that it was not a single memory at all, that it was simply her, all of her, every year of her since the train. He did not say it. He was 13, and the words for it had not finished growing yet, and some doors you do not force even your own hand against before their time. "It's a good memory," he said, "the best one. I'll tell you the whole of it someday." "You'd better," said Hermione. "I'll hold you to it. I hold you to everything." And she took his hand again, and they went to finish saving the night. They flew Buckbeak up to the tower window and freed Sirius from his locked cell minutes before the Dementors could reach him, and Harry's godfather, astride a hippogriff in the moonlight, free, alive, looked down at the 2 children who had bent the rules of the universe to give him his life back. "You're less like your father than I thought," Sirius told Harry. "You're like him in the ways that count." But this, he glanced at Hermione, at their joined hands, at the whole improbable partnership of them. "This is something James never had, not at 13, not at 20. Hold on to it, Harry, hold on to her. People like us, we don't get many. When you find the one who'd turn back time for you, you keep them. That's the only wisdom I've got left, and it cost me 12 years to learn it." He looked at the sky, at freedom. "I'll write, I swear I'll write. And when I've cleared my name, and I will clear it, there'll be a home for you, a real one. You'll never go back to those people again." Then he was gone up into the night, and Harry stood by the lake with Hermione's hand in his and a promise of a home glowing in his chest like a swallowed coal. The home did not come, not that summer. Sirius could not clear his name because the proof had run down a hole on a moonlit night, and a wanted man could not file for custody of a boy. And when Harry, in the last days of term, asked Dumbledore whether he might live with his godfather even so, in hiding, anywhere but Privet Drive, the answer was gentle and absolute and arrived with a steel core Harry had learned to feel through any amount of warmth. "You must return to your aunt and uncle, Harry," Dumbledore said. "I know it is not the home you long for. I know the Dursleys do not love you, and I am sorrier for that than I can easily say." He did sound sorry. That was the thing about Dumbledore, the sorrow was real and it changed nothing. But your mother's sacrifice laid a protection on you that lives in her sister's blood. While you can call the place where your mother's kin live home, you're safe there from Voldemort in a way you can be nowhere else, not even with Sirius, not even with me. It is the one shelter he cannot breach. I cannot trade your life for your happiness. I will not. So you will go back every summer until you are of age, because I have weighed your safety against your loneliness and chosen your safety, and I would choose it again. It was, Harry thought, watching the old man say it, the most honest the headmaster had ever been with him, and that honesty was its own kind of cold. He was being told plainly that he would be kept in a house without love because a calculation required it, and that the one making the calculation grieved over it and would not change it. There was no arguing with grief that has already decided. He told Hermione on the train home, the two of them and Ron in a compartment going south, the time turner returned, the year's danger spent. He told her about the protection in his aunt's blood and the home that would not come, and Dumbledore's gentle, immovable no. Hermione listened, and she did the still thing, the going quiet thing, and when she spoke her voice was careful in a way that meant she had thought hard before letting the words out. "He might even be right about the blood," she said. "The protection's real. I've read about sacrificial magic. It's some of the oldest there is, so I'm not going to tell you he's lying about the danger." She turned her face to him, but Harry listened to what he actually said. "He's weighed your safety against your happiness, and he'll choose your safety every single time, and he'll be sad about it, and he'll do it anyway for years, no matter what it costs you, because he's decided your survival matters more than your life being worth living, and I want you to notice something." She held his gaze. "A person who'd keep you safe and lonely on purpose year after year because he needs you alive for something, that person is making sure that when the something comes, you'll have learned to expect very little and to do as you're told, and to believe that being kept apart from the people who love you is just the price of being you." Her jaw set. "I don't know what he's keeping you alive for, but I know I don't like the shape of how he's doing it, so here's what's going to happen. You'll go back to that house because the blood protects you, and I'm not reckless about your life. And I'm going to write to you every single day, and so will Sirius, and you are not going to spend one summer believing the lie that you're meant to be alone. They can have your address, they cannot have that." "Friendship and bravery," Harry said, around the swallowed coal that had not, after all, gone out. "Friendship and bravery," Hermione said, and she took his hand on the seat between them where Ron could see and did not mind, because Ron had long since understood the shape of the thing he was sitting next to, and the train carried the three of them south through the gold evening toward a summer that would not, this time, be silent, because one of them had decided it would not be, and what Hermione Granger decided, the universe had mostly learned to allow. And it did allow it. That summer, for once, Privet Drive was not silent. Hedwig came almost daily, sometimes twice, and the Dursleys learned to flinch at the tap of a beak on the glass and to say nothing, because a godfather who was a convicted mass murderer had written Harry a letter that first week, cheerful, careless, deliberately visible, remarking how very much he looked forward to hearing that his godson was being treated well, and Uncle Vernon had gone the color of cold porridge and not raised his voice to Harry again all August. Sirius wrote about nothing and everything, the warm country he was hiding in, the food, a memory of James turning a teacher's hair blue, and a line at the end of each letter that always, in some form, said the same thing: "Hold on, it will not be much longer, there will be a home." And Hermione wrote every day, as she had promised, long letters that were half revision timetable and half the small, ordinary news of a girl spending August with two baffled dentists, and that always ended the same way, a line set apart at the bottom. 8 weeks, 7, 6, she was counting down to the 1st of September as other children counted down to Christmas. She sent him a book on advanced defensive magic for his birthday with a note that she expected the first 6 chapters read before the train, that she had read all of it twice and tabbed the parts that would keep him alive. She sent a box of the good chocolate, the kind that worked on Dementors, with a single line: "In case you need it before I am there to make you eat it." Harry lined the letters along the windowsill of the smallest bedroom, Sirius's and Hermione's both, and read them over in the evenings, as he had once taken a thought out of his pocket to be sure it was real, and the cupboard-shaped thing in him that had spent 10 years learning to want nothing stayed quiet and did not come back. An innocent godfather and a relentless girl had between them done the thing Dumbledore's careful arithmetic had never thought to do. They had made certain that Harry Potter, kept for his own safety in a house with no love in it, did not for one single day believe he was alone in the world. The blood in his aunt's veins kept him alive. The ink on his windowsill kept him himself. He was beginning to understand that he would need both. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. fire and ash the summer before the fourth year ended with the sky on fire, and Harry would think later that it had been a warning he was too happy to read. He had spent the best part of August at the Burrow, which had become, by unspoken agreement, the place he went the moment the blood protection had been satisfied and Dumbledore's arithmetic would let him leave Privet Drive. Hermione had come too, the two of them and Ron sharing the chaos of the crooked house, and they had gone, the whole noisy crowd of Weasleys and their adopted strays, to the Quidditch World Cup, and it had been a glory of color and noise and 100,000 witches and wizards under one enchanted sky. What Harry remembered best afterward was the campsite before the match. The Weasleys' battered tent that was somehow a small house inside, Mr. Weasley delighting in a kettle he had to be talked out of fixing with magic, Hermione and Ginny arguing happily over a program, Ron and the twins shouting about the odds, and Harry in the middle of all of it with a mug of cocoa, belonging, simply belonging, to a loud, warm crowd of people who would have counted him missing if he had wandered off. He had spent 10 years being no one's responsibility. He sat in that tent and was comfortably several people's, and thought he would not trade it for all the gold in the champion's tent at the far end of the field. And then in the dark after the match, it had gone wrong. Masked figures in the firelight, muggles tossed screaming into the air for sport, families fleeing through the trees. And above the chaos, conjured into the night by someone who wanted the old terror remembered, a vast green skull with a serpent for a tongue, burning against the stars. The dark mark, the sign Voldemort's followers had flown over the houses of the people they murdered 15 years before, when the world had last been afraid. Harry stood in the burning campground with Hermione's hand gripping his and Ron close on his other side, the three of them backed against a tree, and watched the mark burn and felt the year turn cold around him before it had properly begun. "It's starting again," Hermione said very quietly so the younger children would not hear. "Isn't it? Whatever's been coming since the train in first year, it's starting." She did not let go of his hand. "Whatever it is, we're in it together, say it." Together, Harry said, always. He did not know yet how hard the year would try to make a liar of them both. The trouble announced itself in October in the Great Hall in fire. The Triwizard Tournament had come to Hogwarts, a contest between 3 schools, 3 champions chosen by an impartial magical object, the Goblet of Fire, that weighed the worth of every name dropped into its flames and spat back the 3 most fit to compete. It was meant for of-age students only, 17 and over. A line drawn in the air by Dumbledore himself kept the younger ones from entering. The whole school had spent a week in a fever of speculation, and on Halloween the Goblet had chosen Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts, Fleur Delacour for Beauxbatons, Victor Crumb for Durmstrang, 3 champions. The hall had cheered. And then the goblet had flared red a 4th time and spat out a 4th name, a name that should not have been possible, a name from a school that had already chosen, the name of a 14-year-old who had not entered and could not have entered and did not want to be entered, Harry Potter. He walked up to the front of the hall through a silence that he recognized because he had walked through it before in second year when the castle had decided he was Slytherin's heir. The same silence, the same 1,000 faces turning. The same swift, total reversal of a school that loved him one week and suspected him the next. By the time he reached the little chamber off the hall where the champions waited, the verdict had already formed in the corridors behind him. Harry Potter had found a way to cheat an ancient magical contest, had put his own name in for the glory, had stolen a place from the of-age students who had earned it. A boy who always had to be at the center of everything. He had not put his name in. He said so to Dumbledore, to the furious heads of the visiting schools, to a ministry official, to the staff, and they bound him to the tournament anyway, because the goblet was a binding magical contract, and a name was a name no matter how it had come, and there was nothing for it but for a 14-year-old to compete in a contest that had killed of-age wizards in centuries past. He came out of the chamber into the entrance hall, and the first face he found in the crowd was Hermione's, and he braced, the old brace, for the question. She did not ask the question. She crossed to him through the muttering students and took him by the arm and said before he had to defend himself, "You didn't put your name in." It was not a question. It was a statement, delivered flat and certain to the whole listening hall. "I didn't," Harry said. "Hermione, I swear I never—" "I know you didn't," she said. "I'm not asking, I'm telling you that I know, and I'm telling them." She raised her voice just enough. "He didn't enter. He doesn't want it. Someone has done this to him, and the rest of you can spend the year being thick about it if you like, but I was there when this boy refused to let a man die at his feet who'd betrayed his parents. He doesn't cheat his way into glory. He gives glory away with both hands. So you can find someone else to gossip about." She turned back to Harry and her voice dropped, and the certainty in it did not. "I believe you. I will always believe you. Now let's get out of here. You look like you're going to fall down." She got him out of the hall and up to the bench by the lake in the cold dark and sat with him while the size of it came down on him, and it was there on the broken bench that the year set its terms. The whole world would be against him, and one person would not, and she would say so out loud as many times as it took. The autumn that followed taught Harry exactly how much that mattered. He had thought, after second year, that he knew what it was to have a whole castle turn its back on him. He had been wrong because in second year it had been fear, and fear at least is impersonal. This was contempt, and contempt is intimate. Students he had never wronged wore badges that lit up to insult him. They hissed the word cheat in the corridors. Hufflepuff, Cedric's house, took the fourth name as a theft from their own champion and made Harry pay for it daily. He walked into rooms and felt the temperature of them drop. And every single day in the middle of it there was a table under a third window with a chair understood to be his, and a girl already at it, who looked up when he came in like he was the most ordinary and welcome thing in the world, because to her he was. She did not perform her loyalty. That was the thing Harry came to understand about Hermione that autumn. Other people, when they took a side, made sure to be seen taking it. Hermione simply behaved every hour of every day, as if the question of whether Harry Potter was a liar had never been a question at all, and the steadiness of it, the sheer unbroken ordinariness of being treated as himself by one person while 1,000 others treated him as a story, was the thing that kept the old cupboard smallness from swallowing him whole. He could survive being hated by everyone, he discovered, so long as he was known by someone. It was the cheapest and rarest medicine in the world, and she gave it to him in unlimited quantities and never once asked to be thanked. Ron did not say so. That was the wound under all the others that autumn, the one Harry did not show even Hermione the whole of. Ron, his first friend, the friend who came after, looked at the fourth name out of the goblet and saw a boy who had everything, who was always chosen, always famous, always at the center, and who now had cheated his way into one more spotlight without even sharing how he'd done it. Ron stopped speaking to him, for weeks. The two halves of Harry's small family came apart, and he walked the corridors with Hermione at his side and a Ron-shaped hole where his other side should have been, and it hurt in a way the gossip could not, because gossip came from strangers and this came from a friend. It was Hermione who would not let it stand. She went between them all autumn like a person trying to hold two halves of a cracked plate together by main force, refusing to choose, sitting with Harry and arguing with Ron and snapping at both of them and crying once furiously in the common room when Ron said something about Harry that was beneath him. "You great thick selfish, listen to yourself," she said to Ron, low and shaking. "He didn't enter. You've known him 3 years. You played a chessboard with your own body for him. And the first time the whole world turns on him, you turn too, because you're jealous, because for once the famous orphan has a thing you want." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand hard. "He would never have done it to you. Never. If your name had come out of that goblet, he'd have been the first one cheering, and you know it. So you can be angry at the unfairness of the whole world, Ron Weasley, I am too, but do not you dare aim it at the one person in this castle who'd take a curse for you, because someday you are going to need him to, and he'll do it, and you'll have to live with how you treated him first." Ron came back after the first task. It took a dragon to do it. The first task was dragons. Each champion would face a dragon and retrieve a golden egg from its nest, and Harry learned this in advance, by luck and by Hagrid, and brought the impossible problem to the only place impossible problems got solved, the third window with Hermione the night before. "You can't outfight a dragon," Hermione said, books spread across the table, the lamp burning low. "You can't outmuscle it, you're 14, it's a nesting mother and they're the worst, so you don't. You do the thing you're best at in the entire world, the thing the rest of us can't touch you at, and you do it under the worst pressure anyone's ever put you under." She slid a book across to him. "You fly. You can't bring your broom into the arena, but you can summon it, Akio. It's fourth-year work and you'll have it cold by morning if I have to keep you up all night, which I'm fully prepared to do. You call your firebolt over the wall, you get in the air where no dragon can match you, and you take the egg on the wing. That's the plan. That's the whole plan. Now, wand up, say it." They drilled the summoning charm until 2 in the morning, every object in the room flying to Harry's hand again and again, Hermione relentless, correcting his wrist, his focus, his footing, until the spell was not a thought he had but a thing his body did. And the next afternoon, in an arena ringed with screaming thousands, with a Hungarian horntail rearing over a clutch of eggs and breathing fire, Harry stood in the open and raised his wand and called his broom over the castle wall, and it came and he flew, and the fear went silent as it always did once his feet left the ground, and he took the golden egg out of a dragon's nest on the wing while the world roared. Ron found him in the champion's tent afterward, white-faced. "That was Harry, nobody could have put their name in for that, nobody'd be that mad, I should have." Ron ran out of the speech he'd clearly been rehearsing and just stood there, miserable and ashamed and 17 kinds of sorry, and Harry, who had spent 10 years with nobody and now could not bear to be short one friend, let him off because that was the trade you made for the kind of family you chose. You forgave them the times they were stupid because they forgave you yours. "You're an idiot," Harry said. "I know," said Ron. "Hermione's going to make you say a great deal more than that." "I know that too," said Ron with feeling, and the plate was mended, cracked, and visible along the seam but holding, and the 3 of them were 3 again. The Yule Ball was the strangest battlefield of the year because it was supposed to be fun. A great formal dance, part of the tournament, and suddenly the castle was a flurry of nerves about a thing none of them had been taught and most of them dreaded. The boys terrified of asking and the girls terrified of not being asked. The whole school turned inside out over a dance. Victor Krum, the famous Quidditch player, the Durmstrang champion, 18 years old and pursued by half the girls in 3 schools, had spent the autumn haunting the library, and the thing he had been haunting it for turned out to be Hermione, who went there to work and had not noticed she was being admired because she never noticed she was being admired. He asked her to the ball. It was by any measure a remarkable thing, an international Quidditch star asking a 14-year-old bookworm to dance, and the news went round the castle like fire. Hermione said no. She told Harry about it at the third window almost crossly, as though Krum had set her a problem she had not asked to solve. He's perfectly nice. He's quiet actually underneath all the fuss, and he likes that I don't fawn, but I said no. She turned a page she was not reading. Because I'd already worked out who I wanted to go with, and it isn't him, and it would be dishonest to go with somebody just because he's famous when there's somebody else I'd rather stand next to all evening. Oh, said Harry. Who? Hermione looked at him over the top of the book with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering on the spot every theory she had ever held about his intelligence. You, Harry, she said. Obviously, I'd like to go with you. We'll be hopeless, neither of us can dance. We'll stand at the edge and make fun of everyone and leave early and go and sit by the lake, and it will be 100 times better than going with somebody impressive I'd have to make conversation with. So that's settled, unless you've some objection, in which case I'd like to hear it. Harry did not have an objection. Harry had in fact been trying for a week to work up the courage to ask her, and had been telling himself she would obviously rather go with someone better, and the discovery that she had been waiting for him to ask, that she had turned down an international celebrity to stand at the edge of a dance with a 14-year-old who could not dance, did something to him that he did not have a word for and did not go looking for because they were 14, and some things were allowed to be just exactly what they were. No more and no less, 2 friends who would rather be at the edge of the room together than at the center of it apart. They went together. They were hopeless. They stood at the edge and made fun of everyone, and Hermione looked, in dress robes with her hair done, like someone Harry had to keep reminding himself was the same person who chewed quills over arithmancy. And Krum watched her across the hall with the resignation of a man who had been turned down for a better offer he could not compete with. And at 10:30 the 2 of them slipped out of the warmth and the music and went down to the bench by the lake in their finery, and sat in the cold with their shoulders touching, and Hermione took off her uncomfortable shoes and sighed, and Harry thought that this, the leaving together, was the part of any room he liked best. Victor asked me what you were to me, Hermione said to the dark water. He couldn't work it out. He said, are you Harry Potter's girl? And I said no, and he said his sister then, and I said no, and he gave up. She pulled her knees up. I didn't have a word for him either. There isn't one. Friend is too small and everything else is too big, and we're 14, so most of them don't apply yet anyway. She turned her head and looked at him in the dark. But I know what it is, even if I can't name it. It's the thing where I turned back time for you and didn't think twice. It's the thing where I'd believe you over the whole world and the whole world over nobody else. It doesn't need a word, it just needs to be true, and it's true, and that's enough for now. That's enough for now, Harry agreed, and they sat by the lake in their dress robes until the cold drove them in, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else needed saying, and the egg from the dragon sat up in the dormitory waiting to give up its secret, and the second task was coming, and the year had not finished with them, not by a long way. The egg, when they finally made it sing instead of scream, sang of the lake. Come seek us where our voices sound, it told them in a chorus that only made sense underwater. An hour to find something precious that had been taken and hidden in the black depths of the lake, something the champion would, the riddle said, sorely miss. Hermione threw herself into the problem of how Harry would breathe underwater for an hour, which was the practical question, the solvable one, and between her research and a timely hint they found the answer in a slimy plant called gillyweed. And the night before the task she drilled him on the merpeople's village in the cold and the dark exactly as she had drilled him on the summoning charm, relentless and exact, keeping him alive the only way she knew. Which was to make sure he knew everything there was to know before he had to use it. What neither of them said aloud that last night was the part of the riddle that had nothing to do with breathing, something you will sorely miss. The champion's hostages had been taken in secret and hidden in the lake, 1 precious person each, enchanted into sleep, and the question of whose person had been taken was a question with an answer. And the answer, when Harry dived into the freezing black water the next morning and swam down through the weed in the dark to the merpeople's village, was waiting for him bound to a statue at the bottom of the lake, hair drifting like ink in the current, fast asleep. Entrusted to the cold for an hour because the tournament's own magic had reached into Harry Potter and asked who he would most sorely miss and had answered her, Hermione. He got her loose. Got her to the surface, the 2 of them breaking up into the air and the light with the whole school cheering on the banks, and she came awake coughing and clutching him in the cold water, and the first thing she did before she had her breath, before she understood she had won him the task by being the thing he could not lose, was reach up and straighten his soaked glasses, 2 fingers to the bridge, because the gesture was older than thought now, and Harry laughed in the freezing water with relief and something larger than and held on to her and did not say the thing the lake had said for him because he did not need to. The magic had said it. They had both heard it. Some things, once a lake has spoken them, do not need a 14-year-old to say them again. It chose you, Hermione said later on the bench, wrapped in a blanket, her hair still damp. The task to take. It reached into your head and took the person you'd most, and it took me. She said it carefully, turning it over, a fact almost too large to hold. I'd wondered, whether I was making more of this than there was, whether it was just me. And then an ancient piece of tournament magic looked at your whole heart and pulled out the same answer I'd have given. She tucked the blanket tighter. I'm not making more of it than there is, that's all I wanted to know. You never were, Harry said. It's the truest thing in my life. The lake just agreed with you. By the end of that task, the school had quieted a little. It is hard to keep hating a boy you have just watched dive into a freezing lake and come up holding the unconscious girl everyone knew was his whole heart. Even the insulting badges came off here and there after that. Harry did not trust the quiet, having learned in second year exactly how fast a castle could change its mind, and he was right not to. But for a few weeks in the spring, the corridors let him alone, and he spent them where he always spent the good weeks, at the third window and the broken bench, with Hermione on one side and a sheepish, restored Ron on the other. Ron worked at being forgiven. He carried Harry's bag without being asked, talked strategy for the last task for hours, and one evening said, staring hard at the fire, that he had been a prize idiot in the autumn, and that if Harry's name ever came out of a cursed goblet again, he would believe him inside the first second. Harry said that was a low bar, and Ron threw a cushion at him, and it was, in its clumsy way, the sound of the last crack in the plate sealing over. The night before the third task, Harry could not sleep, and neither, it turned out, could Hermione, and they met by unspoken agreement at the third window with the castle dark and quiet around them. She had not come to drill him. There was nothing left to drill. He knew the maze spells cold. She had seen to that. She had come, he understood, simply to be awake with him in the last quiet hours, because some nights a person should not be alone with the size of what is coming, and she had decided, as she decided most things about his well-being, that this was one of them. Whatever's in that maze tomorrow, she said, it's the last task, and then the tournament's done and we go to the burrow, and this whole horrible year is over. She was trying to make it small, to shrink it to a size they could both carry, and Harry loved her for the trying, even as he felt under his ribs that it would not shrink. And then 5th year, and we'll have a normal one, I've decided. A completely ordinary year where the worst thing that happens is exams. You don't believe that, Harry said. No, Hermione admitted after a moment. I saw the mark over the campsite the same as you. I've read what's coming as well as anyone can read it. She turned her face to him in the lamplight, but I wanted to say the ordinary version out loud once before it stops being possible, so that we both remember there was a version of our lives where the worst thing was exams and we wanted it and it was taken from us. I think it matters to know that, so you never believed the war was always your whole life. It wasn't. There was this. A table and a window and us doing homework. Hold on to that. It's what we're fighting to get back to. Harry held on to it. He would hold on to it through everything that came after. The table and the window and a girl who had stayed awake with him on the last ordinary night either of them would have for a long time, because she had known, before he had, that they were standing on the last of the easy ground, and had wanted him to feel it solid under his feet once more before it went. The third task was a maze, and the maze was a trap, and Harry walked into it not knowing the year had been building, from the very first night, to one particular grave. He had not seen the shape of it. None of them had. Someone had put his name in the goblet in October and steered him through every task since, kept him alive and winning and on course, not out of mercy, but because the whole tournament had been built, this one year, around delivering Harry Potter to a single place at a single time with no one to come after him. The maze was full of hedges and horrors and enchantments, and Cedric Diggory, the Hogwarts champion, decent and brave and 17, reached the Triwizard Cup at the center at the same moment Harry did, and the two of them, having helped each other through the last of it, agreed to take it together, a shared victory for their shared school. They took it together. And the cup was a portkey, and it was not a prize, and it tore the two of them out of the maze and the lights and the watching thousands and dropped them in the dark, in a place that smelled of old earth and yew, among the leaning stones of a graveyard far from Hogwarts, far from Dumbledore, far from anyone who could help. Harry would not tell the whole of what happened in that graveyard for a long time, and when he told it, it was to Hermione in the dark in pieces over weeks. He told her how a small cloaked figure had come out of the dark carrying a bundle, and how a high cold voice had given an order, and how the order was 2 words, kill the spare. He told her that Cedric Diggory, 17 years old, who had wanted nothing but to win a fair contest for his school, had died in a flash of green light before he understood there was anything to be afraid of, dead before he hit the ground because he was, to the thing in the bundle, nothing, a spare, an inconvenience to be cleared away. Harry told her that he would hear those 2 words for the rest of his life. He told her how he had been bound to a headstone, the stone of Tom Riddle's own father, and forced to give blood for a ritual, and how the bundle had been tipped into a great cauldron, and how a thing had risen out of the boiling dark, tall and thin and white, with red eyes and slits for nostrils, the thing that had murdered his parents, returned at last to a body of its own. Lord Voldemort, whole again, alive again, walking the earth again, and around him the cloaked figures of his followers apparating in answer to a summons 15 years cold, kneeling in the grass among the graves. And he told her how Voldemort had wanted, more than a clean murder, a performance, a duel, the famous boy killed properly in front of an audience to prove the legend ended here. How he had freed Harry from the stone and given him his wand back so the killing would look like a contest. How Harry, 14, outmatched in every possible way, had done the only thing left, which was to refuse to die kneeling, and had thrown himself behind a headstone and shouted a disarming charm at the same instant Voldemort threw the killing curse, so that the 2 spells had met in the air between them. And then he told her the impossible thing. Their wands shared a core, brother feathers from the same phoenix, and when the spells collided the wands locked, a thread of golden light connecting them, and Voldemort's wand had begun to shake and then to disgorge in reverse the echoes of the lives it had most recently taken. Cedric, an hour dead, formed in pale shadow and asked Harry to take his body home. An old man Voldemort had killed. And then a woman and then a man, shadows of memory pouring out of the murderer's own wand, and the 2 of them had Harry's chin and Harry's eyes, and they had spoken to him, his mother and his father, drawn out of death by the brother wands for one impossible minute, and they had told him to hold on, to break the connection when they said, and to run, and that they were proud of him and that they loved him. And Harry had stood in a graveyard holding a thread of gold against the strength of the most powerful dark wizard alive, with his dead parents at his shoulder telling him he was not alone even here, even in the worst place, even at the end. He had broken the connection on his mother's word. He had run, dodging curses among the stones, and he had reached Cedric's body, and he had reached the cup, and the portkey had torn him back to Hogwarts, to the lights and the crowd and the band, with a dead boy's hand gripped in his, and the news that the war was not over but beginning, that Voldemort had returned, that the long peace was a corpse. He came back to chaos and grief, and almost at once, to the careful machinery of adults who needed the story to be other than it was. The Ministry would not believe him. The Minister for Magic himself stood in the hospital wing and refused flatly to accept that Voldemort had returned, because a returned Voldemort was a catastrophe and a lying boy was merely an embarrassment, and the second was so much more convenient than the first. Within a day the official position was forming. Harry Potter was disturbed, attention-seeking, traumatized, unreliable. The same machinery that had made him a cheat in October set to work making him a liar in June, and Harry, 15 now, exhausted past speech, watched it happen from a hospital bed and did not have the strength to fight it. He did not have to. He had people whose job it was to come after him. Hermione did not leave the hospital wing. She had been waiting at the edge of the maze when the cup brought him back with Cedric's body, had been the first through the crowd, had got to him before the teachers, and she did not leave his side through the long, terrible night that followed. She did not ask him to talk. She did not tell him it would be all right. She sat in the chair she had sat in so many times before in so many years, and she held his hand, and when the grief finally came up out of him in the gray hour before dawn, the grief he had been holding back through the Ministry's disbelief and Cedric's father's keening and the whole machinery of the night, she did not flinch from it. He wept for a boy who had died for nothing, for 2 words spoken in a cold voice, for the certainty that the peace was over and the dark had come back and people he loved were going to die in it. And Hermione held on to him and let it be exactly as terrible as it was, as she had done on a train 2 years before, because the one medicine she had ever been able to give him was to believe in the full size of his wounds and refuse to make them smaller. "I've got you," she said into the dark again and again, the only thing worth saying. "I've got you, you're not alone, you came back to me, I've got you." And Harry, who had been told by a high cold voice in a graveyard that he was a legend that ended tonight, who had watched a kind boy die as a thing to be cleared away, who had been disbelieved by his own government before the blood was dry, held on to the one fixed point he had ever found and believed her, and let her have the weight of it because she had taught him year by year that this was not weakness, that a person who carried everything alone was not strong. That he was carried and he carried in return, and that this, exactly this, was the thing the creature in the graveyard would never understand and never have and never be able to take. The days that followed were gray and strange. The school went home early, the tournament abandoned, and before they went there was a memorial for Cedric in the great hall. The hangings turned black, the whole school silent for once, no badges, no hissing, the contempt of the autumn forgotten in the face of a real death. Dumbledore stood and told them the truth, that Cedric had been murdered by Lord Voldemort, and the Ministry man went white with fury at the naming of it, and a line was drawn that night through the whole of Wizarding Britain, between those who would face what had happened and those who would pretend it away. Harry watched the pretending begin and understood that he had landed without choosing it on the hard side of the line, and that Hermione and Ron had landed there beside him without hesitating, because where Harry stood was simply where they stood. He sat with Cedric's parents for a few minutes before the train. He gave them the tournament winnings, which he could not bear to keep, and they did not want to take them and took them in the end because grief makes people unable to argue, and Cedric's father held Harry's hand too long and said you were with him at the end in a voice that broke. And Harry carried that out of the year too, the knowledge that being near him at the wrong moment had cost a good man his son. Hermione found him afterward on the platform, white and quiet, and did not tell him it was not his fault, because he would not have believed it yet, but took his hand and stood beside him in the noise of the departing school, present and unmoving, a fixed point, until the worst of the minute had passed and he could breathe again. Dumbledore came to him in the morning. The headmaster heard the whole story without once doubting a word, which was its own kind of relief after the ministry, and he believed Voldemort had returned, and he began, even as he sat by the bed, to set in motion the things that would be needed for a war. He was kind, the kindness was real, and under it, where Harry had learned to listen, ran the cold current, and what it said this time frightened Harry more than the ministry's lies, because it was not a lie. You have seen now what he is, Dumbledore said quietly, and what he will do to anyone who stands near you. Cedric Diggory died because he was beside you when the Portkey took you. That was not your fault, Harry. I want you to hear me say that it was not your fault. He paused, and the blue eyes were very tired and very old and very far away, somewhere in a future only he could see. But I want you to understand the shape of what is coming. He will use the people you love. He will reach for them precisely because you love them, to make you reckless, to make you grieve, to make you do as he wishes to spare them. The more you are loved, the more there is for him to take. It may be that the kindest thing in the end, the safest thing for everyone near you, is for you to learn to hold them at a little more distance, to need them a little less, so that there is less for him to use. Harry looked at the old man who had just told him truthfully that loving people would get them killed, and who was, in the same breath, advising him to love them less, the same advice the headmaster had given him at 11 in front of a mirror, grown now from a gentle warning into something that sounded, in the wake of a graveyard, very nearly like an instruction. He thought about a graveyard and a thread of gold and his mother and father drawn out of death to stand at his shoulder and tell him to hold on. He thought about Hermione's voice in the dark. I've got you. You're not alone. He thought about which of those two things had actually got him out of that graveyard alive, and it had not been distance. With respect, sir, Harry said, and his voice was hoarse, but it did not waver. You've got it backward. Again, I didn't survive that graveyard by being alone. I survived it because my mum and dad came out of his own wand to stand with me, because I have never once been as alone as he is, and I never will be, and that's the whole difference between us. He met the exhausted blue eyes. You keep telling me to need people less so he can't use them, but the people are the reason I'm still here. Take them away and you don't make me safe, you just make me him. And I'd rather die as myself with people I love than live as the thing in that graveyard. So no, sir, with respect, I won't. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and something passed over the old face that might have been sorrow and might have been fear and might, just possibly, have been a very old man hoping with all his heart to be proven wrong about a plan he had already begun to build. I hope you never have cause to change your mind, he said. And he rose and he went out to begin the war, and Harry lay in the hospital bed with Hermione asleep in the chair beside him, her hand still in his, and watched the gray dawn come up over a world that had got darker in the night, and was not afraid of it quite because he was not facing it alone, and had decided in a graveyard with his parents at his shoulder that he never would be. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Of age, the 5th year was the year the world decided that telling the truth was the crime. Voldemort had returned, and the Ministry of Magic, terrified of what that meant, chose the comfortable lie instead, and the comfortable lie required that Harry Potter be discredited, mocked, painted as a disturbed boy, and a liar in every newspaper in Britain. And to make sure the lie held inside Hogwarts itself, the Ministry sent Dolores Umbridge, a small, smiling woman in pink who spoke to children as though they were slightly disappointing pets, and gave her power and then more power until she ran the school like a small, cruel country and forbade them, in the one class that might have saved their lives from so much as drawing a wand. She made them read. Defense against the dark arts became an hour of copying from a book that taught nothing, while outside the castle a war gathered, and any student who pointed this out was punished. Harry was punished a great deal. He spent evening after evening in Umbridge's office writing lines with a cursed quill that cut the words into the back of his own hand. I must not tell lies, over and over until the sentence was scarred into his skin, and he told no one because there was a war coming and a scarred hand was a small thing, until the night Hermione caught his sleeve and pushed it back and saw. She did not shout, that was the frightening part. Hermione, who shouted at injustice as naturally as breathing, went silent and white and absolutely still, holding his ruined hand in both of hers, tracing the scarred words with one fingertip. She's been carving this into you, Hermione said very quietly, for weeks, and you let her, because you decided your pain was a small thing next to the war. She looked up at him. It is not a small thing, you are not a small thing. I want you to hear me say it because you have spent your whole life being taught the opposite by people who needed you to believe it, and now a woman in pink is teaching it to you again with a knife, and I will not have it. Her voice shook finally. We're going to do something about her. Not the quill, I can't undo the quill, I'll heal it as best I can. But the thing she's really doing, which is making sure that when Voldemort comes for us we won't know how to fight, we're going to fix that ourselves, tonight. Come on, that was the night Dumbledore's army was born, though they did not call it that yet. It was the truest partnership of Harry's life, and it taught him what he and Hermione were when they pulled in the same direction with everything they had. The idea was hers. If the Ministry would not let them learn to defend themselves, they would teach themselves in secret, and Harry, who had faced a dragon and a basilisk and Voldemort himself and lived, would teach them. Hermione built it. She found the room, an enchanted chamber that appeared only to those in need of it. She found the recruits, 24 students who wanted to learn to fight. She made the rules and the means of communication and the enchanted coins that carried the time of each meeting and burned hot in a pocket when the day came, a piece of magic so far beyond their year that even she had been quietly proud of it. She organized, he taught, and he was good at it, which surprised him. He stood in front of frightened students and taught them the disarming charm and the Patronus and the spells that had kept him alive, and they learned because he taught the way Lupin had taught him, as if the person in front of him mattered more than the lesson because Lupin had shown him how. Neville, who could barely hold a wand in first year, learned to duel. Timid students stood straighter. And at the center of it, every meeting, was the thing the two of them made together. Hermione handing him a room she had built, and Harry filling it with everything he knew, and the two halves fitting so cleanly that students who watched them work assumed they had been doing it for years, which in every way that counted they had. You realize, Hermione said one night, the room emptying around them, the coins collected, that this is what we're going to do, for the rest of it, the whole war, this. She gestured at the room, the dummies, the lingering silver mist of a dozen Patronuses. You out front because people follow you and they should, me behind it making sure the thing actually works. It's what we did at the Troll when you think about it. You went for the danger and I worked out how to beat it. We've just been getting better at it for 5 years. Friendship and bravery, Harry said. Friendship and bravery and a great deal of careful planning you never thanked me for, said Hermione, and bumped his shoulder, and they put out the lights together, and Harry thought that he could face almost anything as long as the facing of it looked like this. What made the year hardest in the end was not Umbridge, and not even the meetings snatched in secret. It was that Voldemort had got inside Harry's head. Ever since the graveyard the connection had been there, a hot wire running from the scar on Harry's forehead to the mind of the thing that had made it, and that year it opened wide. Harry dreamed Voldemort's dreams, felt his rages, saw through his eyes, woke with the scar splitting. Dumbledore, keeping a cold distance for reasons Harry did not yet understand, sent him to Snape for occlumency. Lessons in sealing the mind that were really an hour of Snape forcing his way into Harry's worst memories and sneering at them, and they left the connection worse, not better, until Harry felt his own mind was a house with the doors torn off. He told Hermione because he told Hermione everything. And Hermione, who could not seal his mind for him, did the thing she could do, which was to give him so much that was unmistakably his own that the intruder could never pass for him in his own head. She made him describe the third window to her when the dreams got bad, the exact fall of the light, the knock of the radiator, the things only the two of them knew. She made him recite the Troll Night back to her, the founding story, until it was a wall he could stand behind. He can show you his anger, she told him, but he can't fake this because he has never had it and cannot imagine it. When you cannot tell whose thoughts are whose, reach for the things he could never invent, reach for us. He will never be able to follow you there. It was better occlumency than Snape ever taught because it was built out of the one material Voldemort did not possess. The year did not let it stay that clean. It ended, as the bad years did, in a single catastrophic night. Voldemort had learned that there was a prophecy, a recording of words spoken before Harry was born, kept in the Department of Mysteries deep under the Ministry, and he wanted it, and he could not get it himself, and so he reached into Harry's mind, which had been open to him since the graveyard, and planted a vision. Sirius, captured, tortured, dying in the Department of Mysteries. It was a lie. It was bait. And Harry, who would walk through any fire for the people he loved, took it. Hermione tried to stop him. She stood in the common room and argued with everything she had that it was too neat, too convenient, that Voldemort wanted him to come, that they should check first, contact the Order, make certain Sirius was even gone. She was right about all of it. But the vision had shown Harry his godfather dying, the one man who had offered him a home, and there are some baits a loving person cannot refuse no matter how clearly he sees the hook, and Harry went. She went with him. Of course she went with him. When it became clear he could not be stopped, Hermione stopped trying to stop him and started trying to keep him alive, which was the older and deeper instinct, and she organized the going, the 6 of them who flew to London on the backs of invisible winged horses into a trap a 15-year-old should never have had to face. They fought Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries among shelves of glowing prophecies. Hermione was struck by a curse that nearly killed her, and Harry carried the terror of that, her crumpling silent in the dark, into everything that came after. That was the moment, more than any other in 5 years, that taught Harry what the war would cost and how it would try to break him. Hermione, mid-spell, knocked off her feet by a jet of light, folding to the stone floor without a sound, so still that for 3 endless seconds Harry was certain she was dead, and the certainty did something no Dementor ever had. It emptied him out and filled him with a cold that had no bottom. He got to her. She was alive, barely, and Neville stayed with her while Harry fought on, and afterward Harry understood that this was the lever the dark would pull for the rest of the war, not threats against him. Threats against her. Voldemort had found the one thing that could make Harry Potter reckless, and it was the same thing that made him worth saving, and there was no separating the two. He would not have separated them if he could, because a Harry who could lose her without that bottomless cold would be a Harry not worth bringing home. The order came. The grown wizards came at last, Sirius among them, alive because the vision had been a lie, and for a few minutes the tide turned. And then Harry watched his godfather, his one chance at a family, laughing as he dueled his murderous cousin, get struck in the chest by a curse and fall backward, slow, through a ragged veil hanging in a stone archway and not come out the other side. Gone. Through the veil between the living and the dead in an instant, on the very night Harry had come to save him, because Harry had come to save him, because the bait had worked. He tried to go through after him. Lupin held him back, arms around his chest, saying, "There's nothing you can do, Harry, he's gone," and Harry screamed that he wasn't. He was just behind the curtain, they had to get him. And Lupin held on and would not let go, and Harry understood in the holding that it was true, that the door Sirius had fallen through opened only one way, and that he had lost, in a single night, the family he had been given and lost and found again, and now lost for the last time. Dumbledore took him back to the castle and to his office, and there at last told him the truth, all of it, 15 years too late. The prophecy was about Harry. It had named him before he could walk, the one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord, born as the 7th month died. Neither can live while the other survives. It meant that in the end it would come down to the 2 of them, Harry and Voldemort, that one of them would have to kill the other, that Harry had been marked for this war before he had a single memory, that the scar on his forehead was a battlefield and always had been. And as Dumbledore said it in the wreckage of the night, with Sirius an hour dead, Harry understood the rest, the part the headmaster did not quite say. He understood why he had been left on a doorstep with people who would never love him. He understood the warnings, year after year, the mirror, the hospital wing, the graveyard. Learn to stand alone, need them less. The safest thing you own is the ability to be alone. He understood that Albus Dumbledore had known since Harry was a baby that the child would one day have to walk toward Voldemort and very possibly die, and that a boy who had been loved, who had a home and people and reasons to live, would be a boy who fought to stay alive instead of a boy who could be sent. He understood that the loneliness of his whole childhood had not been an accident the headmaster regretted. It had been, in part, a preparation. A weapon is easier to aim if it has nothing it would rather be doing. He did not rage at the office the way another boy might have, smashing the instruments, though Dumbledore plainly expected it and would plainly have welcomed it as a fair punishment. Harry stood very still in the ruin of the worst night of his life and said the thing that mattered, quietly, which was worse than shouting. "You wanted me alone," Harry said. "All this time, every time you told me to need people less, you weren't warning me. You were trying to make me into something that could be spent, something that wouldn't mind dying because it never had anything to live for." He looked at the old man, who did not look away. "You left me with the Dursleys knowing they'd starve the wanting out of me, and it nearly worked. For 10 years it worked. And then I met a girl on a train who fixed my glasses, and the whole plan fell apart because she gave me everything you spent 10 years making sure I'd never have, and now I've got too much to live for to be your weapon. Is that it? Is that what you've been afraid of since the sorting? That I went and got a reason to come back?" Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was that of a very old, very tired man who had carried a terrible arithmetic alone for a long time. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what I have been afraid of, and I have been wrong, Harry. I think perhaps I have been wrong about the most important thing of all for a very long time, and I was too proud and too frightened to see it." He looked down at his ruined hand. "I tried to raise a weapon because I believed a weapon was what the world would need. I was mistaken. The thing that will defeat Voldemort is not a boy who has learned to need no one. It is the very thing I tried to take from you. I see that now. I saw it, if I am honest, years ago and refused to believe it because believing it meant admitting I had hurt a child for nothing." He met Harry's eyes. "Forgive me or do not as you see fit. You have the right. But do not, I beg you, let my mistake teach you the lesson I was trying to teach. Do not learn to be alone. It is the one thing that can still save you, and the one thing I spent your childhood trying to destroy." Harry did not forgive him that night. The night was too raw and Sirius too newly gone. But he heard him, and he carried the words out of the office, and they sat alongside the grief, two enormous things he would have to find a way to hold at once. Hermione was waiting outside the hospital wing when he came down, where she had been the whole time, hurt herself, refusing to be sent to bed, and she took one look at his face and did not ask. She just opened her arms, and Harry walked into them and stood there in the corridor in the gray hour, and let himself be held by the person who had, without ever being asked, undone the loneliest plan in the world simply by sitting down beside him on a train. "He told you the prophecy," Hermione said into his shoulder. It was not a question. She had worked it out as she worked everything out. "And you've understood what he did, keeping you alone. Why, he wanted me to have nothing to live for," Harry said, "so I'd be easy to spend." He as good as admitted it. Hermione pulled back and held his face in her hands, and her eyes were fierce and wet and absolutely certain. "Then he failed," she said. "Do you hear me? Whatever he intended, no matter how long he's been steering you toward walking into the dark alone, he failed, Harry, completely, because you were never going to be alone, not from the first day. I decided that on a train when I was 11, and I have not wavered once, and I am not going to start now, no matter what any prophecy says about you and him and who lives." She held his gaze. "Neither can live while the other survives. Fine, let's read it properly, as no one ever bothers to. It doesn't say you face him alone, it just says it comes down to the two of you in the end. It doesn't say a single word about who's standing behind you when it does." Her thumbs brushed the tears off his face. "And I will be, behind you, beside you, wherever you'll have me. He spent your whole childhood trying to make sure you'd walk to your death with nothing. He's going to watch you walk to it with everything instead, with me. That's the answer to his prophecy. That's the part he couldn't see." Harry looked at her, 15 years old, hurt, exhausted, having just survived a battle, holding his face in her hands in a dark corridor and rewriting his death sentence into something he could carry. And he thought with a clarity that the grief could not touch, that he loved her, that he had loved her for years, that it was the oldest and truest fact of his life, and that he was not quite old enough yet to say it. So he said the other thing, which was the same thing in a younger language. "Friendship and bravery," Harry said. "Friendship and bravery," said Hermione, and held on to him in the dark, and that was how they ended the worst year, not apart, the way the plan had wanted, but exactly, defiantly together. The summer Harry turned 16, something that had been growing since a train compartment 5 years before finally came of age and let itself be named. He spent it at the Burrow, as always, but the year had aged them both. They were not children anymore, not quite, not after a veil and a prophecy, and a war that everyone now admitted was real. 16 is old enough to grieve properly and old enough to know your own heart, and Harry spent the first weeks of that summer doing the first. The loss of Sirius a dull weight he carried from room to room, and Hermione was there for all of it, as she had always been there, except that something in how they sat together in the orchard in the long evenings had changed, or rather had stopped pretending not to have changed years ago. It was Hermione who said it first, because of course it was. She had never in her life been able to leave a true thing unspoken once she had finished working it out. They were on the bench, a different bench, the rough wooden seat at the bottom of the Weasleys' orchard, the sun going down red through the apple trees, and they had been quiet a long time. And Harry had his hand open on the seat between them as it had rested open 100 times across 5 years, and Hermione looked at it, and instead of the old companionable grip she laced her fingers through his, slowly, deliberately, a different thing entirely, and held on and let him feel that it was different. "I've been doing a great deal of thinking," she said to the sunset, which was how she always began the things that frightened her. "About words. You know how I am about words. I like the right one for a thing. And Victor asked me once years ago what you were to me, and I didn't have an answer, and I've been not having an answer ever since, telling myself we were too young for the words that fit, that friend was too small, and the rest were too big." She turned her head and looked at him, and her eyes were steady, braver than he had ever seen them, and that was saying a great deal. "We're not too young anymore, we're of age, and I'm tired of using the small word for the biggest thing in my life, so I'm going to use the right one finally, and you can do what you like with it." She took a breath. "I love you, Harry, not the way friends do, the whole way. I think I have since I was 11 and didn't have the word, and I've got it now, and I'm not wasting another year pretending I don't." Harry looked at the girl who had fixed his glasses on a train, who had floated a club onto a troll, who had walked through fire and turned back time and rewritten his death sentence into something he could carry, who had sat down beside him when the whole world stood up and walked away, who had spent 5 years making certain that a boy raised to expect nothing understood daily that he was wanted. "You know the Patronus," Harry said. His voice was not quite steady, and he did not try to make it so. "The one Lupin said was the biggest he'd ever seen, the one you kept asking what I thought about to cast it, and I never told you." He turned and lifted his free hand and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face, the gesture he had learned from her returned 1,000 times over the years. It was you. It was always you, every time. The memory was just you, all of you, the whole of every year since the train. I've been casting my happiest memory off the fact of you since I was 13. I didn't have the word either, I do now. He held her gaze. I love you the whole way. You were the reason I had something to come back for in a graveyard, and you're the reason the loneliest plan in the world never worked, and there has never been one single day since I was 11 that the truest thing in my life wasn't you. The sun went down through the apple trees. Somewhere up the garden, the burrow's windows were coming gold one by one, and a gnome was complaining in the hedge, and the first star came out over the orchard. Hermione kissed him. It was not a practiced thing or a smooth one. They bumped noses, and she laughed wet-eyed, and he laughed, and then they got it right, gently, a first kiss 5 years in the making, the kind that is mostly two people deciding out loud to belong to each other for good. It did not need to be more than that. They were 16, and the war was coming, and what they were promising each other in the orchard was not a night but a life, as much of one as they were going to be allowed. When they drew apart, Hermione kept hold of his hand and put her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars come out over the only ordinary place either of them had, and did not say anything else because the words had all been said, the right ones, finally, and there was nothing left to do but begin. They told Ron the next morning, and Ron said it was about time, and he'd had 2 galleons riding on it with the twins since 3rd year, and he was going to go and collect. And that was the whole of the drama, because the only person who might have minded had worked out years ago where he stood in the shape of the 3 of them, and was, by then, far more interested in a dreamy Ravenclaw girl who saw things other people missed. The rest of that summer had a gold to it that neither of them would forget, even with the war pressing at the edges. They were of age now, and the small rituals of 5 years took on a new color without losing the old. Hermione still straightened his glasses, 2 fingers to the bridge, except that now she did not always take her hand away after. They still found the orchard bench in the evenings, except that now they sat closer. They still said friendship and bravery, except that one night Harry added the 3rd word quietly, and love, and Hermione went still and then laced her fingers through his and said it back, and after that the creed had 3 words instead of 2. Nothing about how they fit had changed. Everything about what they would let themselves call it had. They had simply finally stopped using the small word for the largest thing in either of their lives, and the relief of it ran under all the grief and fear of that summer like a warm current beneath cold water. The 6th year was an education in death, and Dumbledore was the teacher. He came for Harry himself that autumn. The old understanding between them changed by the night in the office, not healed exactly but turned honest, the headmaster no longer hiding the steel and Harry no longer pretending not to see it. It made for strange lessons. The old man would pour Harry a cup of something, and the 2 of them would bend together over a memory in the stone basin, and there was a warmth in it that was almost the warmth of those Patronus evenings with Lupin years before, the warmth of a boy being taught carefully by someone who knew things and wanted him to know them too. And then every so often the steel would surface, a calculation moving behind the blue eyes, a door quietly closing on a question Harry had asked, and Harry would feel the old chill and remember that he was being prepared for something, and that in this man the preparing and the loving had never been separable. He had stopped expecting them to be. He took the warmth where it was real and watched the steel where it showed, and let Dumbledore be the 2 things at once he had always been, because Harry had a war to learn and could not afford to need his teacher to be simple. Dumbledore had begun to die. His right hand was blackened and withered, killed by a curse he had taken trying to destroy a cursed object. The rot held at bay only by Snape's potions and only for a year, and he had decided to spend the year he had left teaching Harry the one thing that mattered, how to kill a thing that had made itself unkillable. Horcruxes, that was the secret at the bottom of everything, the reason Voldemort had survived the night he murdered Harry's parents, the reason he had come back from the diary in the graveyard. He had torn his soul into pieces and hidden the pieces in objects, and as long as a single piece survived, hidden somewhere in the world, he could not truly die. The diary Harry had stabbed in the chamber at 12 had been one of them, destroyed without any of them understanding what it was. There were others. To kill Voldemort, someone would first have to find every hidden fragment of his soul and destroy it, and only then could Voldemort himself be killed. Dumbledore showed Harry the memories in a stone basin, evening after evening, Voldemort as a boy, as a charming and terrible young man, gathering the objects he would defile. Together they worked out what the Horcruxes likely were and where they might be hidden. And Harry took every memory, every theory straight to the 3rd window, where Hermione was waiting, because there were no secrets he kept from her, not anymore, and the 2 of them did with the Horcrux problem what they had done with every problem for 6 years. She organized it, he carried it, and between them it began to have a shape. There was one piece of the puzzle Dumbledore could not simply hand him. A true memory locked in the head of the new potions master, Horace Slughorn, who had once told a young Tom Riddle something he was now far too ashamed to repeat. The number of pieces a soul could be torn into, and the word for the objects that held them. Dumbledore needed that memory and could not get it and asked Harry to, because Slughorn had taken a great liking to the famous Harry Potter, and a thing a teacher will not give a headmaster, he might give a favorite pupil over a glass of wine. It took Harry weeks and luck and a reckless bit of help from a battered old potions textbook, and when he finally drew the true memory out of the ashamed old teacher, he brought it to the third window before he brought it to Dumbledore, because that was simply the order of things now. The world ran through that table first. Hermione watched the memory with him in a borrowed basin, the two of them leaning over the silver surface, and when it was done she sat back and said the number aloud 7, and the size of the task settled over both of them, and she reached for his hand and they held on a long time. "He's preparing you to hunt them," Hermione said one night, the candle low, the diagrams spread between them. "Dumbledore. He's giving you everything he's worked out because he knows he's dying and he wants you to be able to finish it after he's gone." She looked up. "And this time I don't think there's any steel in it. I think he's actually finally just trying to give you the tools and trust you with them. I think the night Sirius died, something in him broke the right way." She reached across the diagrams and took Harry's hand, the new way, the lace fingers way that was theirs now. "But Harry, if he's preparing you to hunt them, then he's preparing us. Because wherever you go after this, I go. We settled that in the orchard, and we settled it years before the orchard. You don't hunt the pieces of that man's soul across the country alone, not while I'm alive to come with you." "I was never going to ask you to stay behind," Harry said. "I know," said Hermione. "That's why I'm going to marry you one day, assuming we both live, which I fully intend that we will. Now, the locket." "Tell me again everything," he said, "about the cave." They were not children playing at war anymore, and the proof of it was how ordinary the extraordinary had become. A typical evening that spring found the three of them, and increasingly a fourth, in a corner of the common room after the others had gone up. Harry and Hermione bent over the Horcrux diagrams, Ron working through the scraps of the orders news his brothers smuggled him, and Luna Lovegood, who had drifted into their orbit by way of the old defense meetings and stayed, reading a magazine upside down and saying every so often the exact thing they needed to hear. It was a strange comfort, that corner. Outside it the war tightened, people vanished, the prophet ran a longer list of the dead each week. Inside it there was a table and friends and the particular warmth of people who have decided to face the worst thing in the world together and to be kind to each other while they do it. Ron had found his place at last, the loyal heart of them, the one who comes after, and he had found Luna besides, who saw what others missed and feared very little. Harry would look up from the diagrams at the four of them in the lamplight and think that this was the thing Voldemort had never had and never would, this exact ordinary warmth, and that the whole war was, underneath, a fight about whether the world would go on being a place where corners like this one were allowed to exist. He meant to see that it would. The cave was the end of it. Dumbledore took Harry there on the last night, to an island in a black lake in a cave by the sea, where a locket Horcrux was hidden behind a potion that had to be drunk, a potion designed to torment whoever drank it, to fill them with their worst fears and despair and a terrible thirst. Dumbledore insisted on being the one to drink it, made Harry promise to force every drop down him no matter how he begged, and Harry kept that promise, the most terrible promise of his life, spooning despair into the mouth of the old wizard who had raised him to be a weapon and come too late to regret it, while Dumbledore wept and pleaded and relived some private agony, and Harry made him drink because he had promised, and because the locket mattered more than either of them. And Dumbledore had taught him that, had spent a whole life teaching him that, and was now the lesson. They got the locket. They fought their way out of the cave through an army of the drowned dead, Dumbledore even poisoned and failing, summoning a ring of fire to drive them back, and they got out and they flew back to Hogsmeade, to a castle with the dark mark burning over it, because in the hours they had been gone the war had come to Hogwarts at last. What happened on the astronomy tower, Harry would carry the rest of his life. Dumbledore dying from the potion, disarmed and cornered by Draco Malfoy and a knot of Death Eaters who had got into the school, and Harry frozen under his invisibility cloak, body bound by the headmaster's last act of protection so that he could not intervene and could not be seen. And Snape arriving, Snape whom Dumbledore trusted, Snape whom Dumbledore looked at and said, simply, "Severus, please." And Snape raising his wand and killing him, a flash of green light, the greatest wizard of the age falling backward off the tower into the dark, dead, gone, the wizard who had been the fixed point of the whole war's resistance, dead by the hand of the wizard he had vouched for. Harry did not understand it that night. He would not understand it for a long time, the full terrible truth of what Dumbledore and Snape had arranged between them, the mercy disguised as murder, the dying man choosing the hand that would end him. That night there was only the horror of it, and Harry's grief, and the castle full of fighting and fear, and a great wizard's body broken on the stones below. He found Hermione in the aftermath in the hospital wing, where the wounded of the night's battle had been gathered, and she was hurt and frightened and looking for him through the chaos, and when she found him whole she did not weep with relief, not yet. She took his hand the new way and she waited, because she could see he was carrying something too large for the corridor, and she had learned a long time ago that the medicine he needed was not words but the certainty of her presence while the thing came up out of him in its own time. It came up later, the two of them apart from the others, by a window, the night going gray toward a dawn the school would wake into changed forever. Harry told her all of it, the cave, the potion, the promise, the tower, Snape, the green light, the falling. And then he told her the other thing, the thing he had decided somewhere between the tower and the hospital wing. He spent my whole childhood trying to make me into something that could die alone for the cause, Harry said. And then at the end he changed his mind and spent the last year of his life trying to give me what he'd taken, the tools and the truth and a fighting chance. Both of those are true. He loved me and he used me, the same as he always did, two things at once, right up to the end. He looked out at the gray grounds, at the white tomb they would build by the lake, and I've decided I forgive him, not because he was right. He was wrong about the most important thing for most of my life, and it cost me 10 years in a cupboard learning to want nothing. But he saw it at the end. He said so. He begged me not to learn the lesson he'd tried to teach me. And a man who can admit, dying, that the great work of his life was built on a mistake about the human heart, I can forgive that. I'd want to be forgiven it. He turned to her, but forgiving him isn't the same as obeying him. He told me at the end not to be alone. That's the one instruction of his I'm going to follow, and it's the one he spent my whole childhood telling me the opposite of. So here's what's going to happen, and I'm telling you this, not asking, because that is how you have always done it with me. He took both her hands. I'm going to hunt the pieces of that man's soul until they're all destroyed, and then I'm going to face him because the prophecy says it has to be me. And I am not going to do one single step of it alone. You're coming, Ron's coming. We finish school after, if there's an after. We go now, together. That's the answer to everything Dumbledore ever planned for me. The weapon he tried to forge grew a heart, and the heart is the thing that's going to win. Hermione looked at him in the gray light, the one she had chosen on a train and chosen every day since, grown now into someone who said together like a law of nature, and she did not argue, because there was nothing to argue with, because he had finally, completely, become the answer to the loneliest plan ever made. Together, she said, and laced her fingers through his. I'll start packing tonight. I've been ready since I was 11. She leaned her head against his shoulder as the dawn came up over Dumbledore's white tomb and the changed world beyond it. Friendship and bravery, Harry, and love. We can say the third one now. We earned it. Friendship and bravery, Harry said, and love, and held onto her in the gray dawn, and was not afraid of the war as he should have been, because he was going to walk into it with everything, exactly as he had promised a graveyard and a prophecy and a dying old man he would, and there was nothing left in the world that could make him walk into it alone. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Everything he won't betray. They did not go back to Hogwarts for the 7th year. There was no Hogwarts to go back to, not really. The school had fallen to Voldemort's people over the summer, the ministry with it, and the world Harry had been born into had gone dark in earnest at last. So instead of a train and a feast and a table under a third window, the 7th year began with 3 teenagers and a beaded handbag full of everything they owned, vanishing into the wild country of Britain to hunt the pieces of a man's soul. The handbag was Hermione's, of course. She had spent the summer preparing it as she prepared everything, an undetectable extension charm, packing a tent and a library and a year of supplies into a bag the size of 2 fists, because if they were going to live on the run, she was not going to let them do it stupidly. She had thought of everything. She had thought of things Harry would not have thought of in 100 years. And when he said so on the first night in a tent pitched in a cold wood with the wind in the trees, she said, "Somebody has to be at the top of the stairs with the rope," which was Ron's old line, and the 3 of them laughed in the dark, and it was the last easy laugh for a long while. There was a bad stretch, in the worst of the cold, when even Ron nearly broke. The locket was on him the day a wireless broadcast read out a list with a Weasley cousin's name in it, and the weight of being cut off from his enormous frightened family, while a fragment of Voldemort's soul whispered in his ear, was nearly more than he could carry, and one night he and Harry said hard things to each other in the dark of the tent, the kind of things that come from fear and not from truth. But Ron did not leave. He took the locket off and he sat with it through the night, and in the morning he said he was sorry and Harry said he was sorry, and Hermione made them both eat breakfast, and that was the end of it, because the 3 of them had been mending cracked plates since they were 12 and had got good at it. Ron's job had never changed since the bench by the frozen lake. He was the one who came after, the one at the top of the stairs with the rope, and on a hunt with no glory in it and no end in sight, the loyal one turned out to be the hardest and most necessary thing to be. The hunt was hard in ways the tasks and the battles had never been. Those had been fast. This was slow, a grinding winter of cold camps and false leads and no idea where the Horcruxes were, moving every few days, hungry, frightened, cut off from everyone they loved, listening to a stolen wireless read out the names of the dead. They had one Horcrux, the locket from the cave, and no way yet to destroy it, and so they took turns wearing it for safekeeping, the heavy gold thing on its chain, and that was their first mistake because the locket was not inert. It was a fragment of Voldemort's soul, and it hated, and it had learned in its long years to reach into whoever carried it and find the seam of their worst fear and work at it like a tongue at a sore tooth. It went for Harry hardest because Harry had the most to lose and the locket knew it. It whispered to him on the long watches, the locket warm and wrong against his chest, and what it whispered was the one thing in all the world that could unmake him. She would be safer without you, it said, in a voice that was almost his own, the voice of every fear he had ever swallowed. Everyone near you dies, Cedric, Sirius, Dumbledore, your parents. You are a thing that gets people killed, and the cleverest, bravest, most alive person you have ever known is sleeping 10 feet away in a freezing tent because she followed you here, and one day soon she will die in the mud for it, and it will be your fault, as it is always your fault, and the last thing she will think is that she should never have fixed your glasses on that train. The locket showed him things. It showed him Hermione dead in the cold. It showed him Hermione walking away, finally seeing him clearly, finally understanding she had wasted her brilliant life on a marked boy who could offer her nothing but an early grave. It showed him the cupboard and the old smallness, and whispered that the cupboard had been right all along, that he had always known he did not deserve to be wanted, that the kindest thing he could do for Hermione Granger was to send her home before the war took her, as it took everyone he loved. It was the most dangerous attack Harry had ever faced, more dangerous than the basilisk, than the graveyard, than anything with a wand, because it was not trying to kill him. It was trying to make him leave her. It was trying to finish the work Dumbledore had started in a cupboard 16 years before, to make Harry believe that alone was safer, that love was a liability, that the brave thing and the loving thing was to send away the people who might be used against him. It was Voldemort's whole philosophy distilled into a whisper, and it had a piece of Harry's own soul-deep fear to say it with, and for 3 weeks it nearly worked. What broke it was Hermione, though she never knew the whole of what the locket had been saying. She found him awake one night at the end of his watch, gray and hollow, the locket in his fist, and she sat down beside him without a word and pried his fingers open and took the locket off him and put it on herself, because she had noticed, as she noticed everything, that it was eating him alive, and she had decided to carry the worst of it for a while so he could sleep. And as she lifted it over her own head, she said, conversational, like it was nothing, like it was the most obvious fact in the world, "You know it lies, don't you? The locket, I can feel it trying. It's been showing me you dead all the ways. It wants me to think loving you is what's going to get you killed." She settled the chain against her own collar. "It's got it exactly backwards, of course. That's the thing about Voldemort, he gets the most important thing exactly backwards every single time. It's almost reassuring. Loving you isn't the thing that's going to get you killed, Harry. It's the only reason you're still alive. I've been keeping you alive with it since the troll, so the locket can whisper whatever it likes. I've done the arithmetic it's too stupid to do, and the answer's the same as it's always been." She took his hand. "Friendship and bravery and love, now go to sleep. I've got the watch and I've got you, and a nasty piece of jewelry isn't going to talk me out of either." And Harry, who had spent 3 weeks being told by a fragment of his enemy's soul that the brave thing was to be alone, looked at the girl who had just put the poison around her own neck so that he could rest, and felt the locket's whisper break against her like a wave against a rock, and understood, finally and completely, the thing the locket and Voldemort and even Dumbledore had never been able to grasp, that the love was not the weakness. The love was the weapon. The love was the thing they did not have and could not understand and could not defeat, and he had been carrying the answer to the whole war around his own neck and mistaking it for a burden. It was Hermione who took him to Godric's Hollow on Christmas Eve, because she had worked out that he needed to go and would never have asked. They went under cover of dark and disguise to the village where Harry had been born and his parents had died, and they walked through the snow to the churchyard, and Hermione held his hand and let him find the grave himself. James Potter and Lily Potter, one stone, the dates close together, dead at 21, younger than Harry could quite believe, with a line carved beneath the names that he did not understand until Hermione explained it was scripture, not surrender. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Harry stood in the snow before the grave of the people who had died to keep him alive, and he had somewhere at last to bring his grief for them, a real place, a stone with their names on it, and he had no flowers, and Hermione conjured a wreath of Christmas roses out of the snowy air and put it in his hands so that he would have something to give them. He laid it down. He could not speak. Hermione stood beside him in the falling snow with her hand in his, and did not fill the silence, because she had understood years ago that the medicine he needed at the graves of his parents was not words but a witness, someone to stand beside him so the grief was shared and therefore survivable. "They'd have liked you," Harry said at last, his voice rough. "My mum especially. Lupin said she stood up for the friendless when it cost her. That's you, that's exactly you. She'd have taken one look at the girl who fixed my glasses on a train and never once let me face anything alone, and she'd have loved you on the spot." He stopped. The snow came down on the old stone. "I wanted them to meet you. It's a stupid thing to want. They've been dead since I was 1, but standing here I want it more than I've ever wanted anything. I wanted them to see it came out all right, that the baby they died for got loved after all, by you." Hermione turned and put both arms around him in the snow in front of his parents' grave, and held him while the thing he had carried his whole life came up out of him at last in the one place it belonged, and over his shoulder she spoke to the stone quietly as though making a promise to two people who could not hear her and to whom she meant to keep it anyway. "He did get loved, he is loved. I've got him and I've had him since the train and I am not letting go. You can rest, I've got him." And Harry, weeping in the snow with the war waiting beyond the churchyard wall, believed her, because she had never once in 7 years told him a thing that was not true. He destroyed the locket himself a week later when they had the sword of Gryffindor at last. He destroyed the locket himself a week later when they had the sword of Gryffindor at last, drawn from a frozen pool by a silver doe whose meaning none of them yet understood. He laid the locket on a flat rock and it screamed and showed him every fear it had. Hermione dead, Hermione leaving, the cupboard, all of it, one last time, and Harry raised the sword and said, "She's not going anywhere and neither am I," and brought the blade down, and the fragment of soul died screaming, and the thing that had tried hardest of all to make him alone was the second of 7 to fall. The hunt went on and it cost them, and the worst of the cost came at a place called Malfoy Manor. They were caught. A taboo on Voldemort's name, spoken by Harry in the false safety of the tent, brought hunters down on them, and they were taken to the Malfoys' great cold house, to a drawing room with a chandelier and a long history of cruelty, and there the war stopped being a thing that happened to other people. Bellatrix Lestrange wanted to know where they had got the sword of Gryffindor, which was meant to be locked in her vault, and she did not believe they had found it by accident, and she decided to ask the question as her kind asked questions. She sent the boys down to the cellar, and she kept Hermione. What happened in that drawing room Harry heard through a foot of stone floor, and it was the worst sound of his life, worse than his mother dying in the Dementors' echo, because his mother's death was old and finished, and this was happening now, 10 feet above him, to the person he loved most in the world, and he could not reach her. Hermione's screams came down through the floor while Bellatrix carved a word into her arm and tortured her for an answer she did not have, and Harry threw himself against the cellar walls until his hands bled, and shouted her name until his voice gave out and could not get to her, and learned in that cellar exactly how much a person could hate and exactly how much a person could love, which turned out to be the same enormous number. He made a vow in that cellar in the dark with her screams coming through the stone, not aloud, a vow shaped like the oldest fact in him. "I am going to get you out of this house alive, and I am going to win this war, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure that no one ever makes you scream again, and if I have to walk through every dark thing left in the world to do it, I will, because you walked through fire for me when we were 11, and I have been trying to deserve it ever since." They got out. A house elf named Dobby, the same elf who had once tried so clumsily to keep Harry from danger, came in the end and saved them all, dropped a chandelier and pulled them into the dark between places and out to a cottage by the sea, and paid for it with his life, a thrown knife finding him as they escaped. Harry buried him by hand, without magic, in the garden above the beach, because some griefs deserved the work of the body, and Hermione stood beside the small grave with her cursed arm bound up, shaking, alive, and Harry held her, and neither of them said anything because they had passed beyond the place where words reached, into the place they had always shared, where being held was the only language left. "You came," Hermione said much later at the cottage, her arm healing, the word the curse had carved still raw beneath the bandage. "I could hear you through the floor, shouting. I kept thinking he's going to break his own hands trying to get through stone, the idiot, and somehow it made it bearable, knowing you were down there going mad trying to reach me. I held onto that instead of the pain, your voice, I held onto your voice. I'd have brought the whole house down," Harry said. "I'd have brought the sky down." "There isn't a thing I wouldn't have done." "I know," said Hermione. "That's what I held on to." After the cottage, the war moved fast toward its end, the way a river moves fast at the falls. There was a Horcrux in a vault at Gringotts, a small golden cup, and they broke into the Wizarding Bank to take it, riding out on the back of a half-blind dragon, and that was the kind of thing that had become ordinary to them, breaking into the impossible places, because they had been doing impossible things together since they were 11, and had simply kept getting better at it. They very nearly did not come out of the bank alive. The vault was cursed, everything in it burning and multiplying at a touch, and they escaped only by freeing the half-blind dragon the goblins kept chained in the dark as a guard, and riding it up through the marble and out into the open sky over London, 3 teenagers and a tortured beast bursting through the bank's roof into daylight while the city stared. They set the dragon loose over a loch in the north and watched it fly off to whatever life it could make, and Hermione, soaked and shaking on the shore, said it was the single most unethical and most necessary thing she had ever done, and that she was not going to think about it too hard, and Harry put his arm around her, and they did not think about it too hard together, which was how they had always got through the things that did not bear thinking about. There was a last Horcrux at Hogwarts, hidden in the castle that had been the first home Harry ever had, and so they went back at last to the school on the night the war came to it for good. The Battle of Hogwarts began at nightfall and did not end until dawn, and Harry would not ever be able to tell the whole of it because the whole of it was too large and too terrible and too full of the dead. The school rose to defend itself. The teachers, the older students, the Order, the whole of Dumbledore's army that Hermione had built and Harry had taught 2 years before, reassembled in an hour to stand against an army of Death Eaters and Giants and Dementors, because when the call went out there were enough people in the world who had decided that some things were worth dying for, and a great many of them had learned it in a hidden room from a boy who taught the way his own teachers had taught him. They did not all live. Harry carried the dead out of that night for the rest of his life. Fred Weasley, laughing in the instant before a wall came down, gone, and Ron's grief a thing Harry would never forget and never stop trying to ease. Remus Lupin, who had taught Harry to make light against the dark, dead on the stone with his wife beside him, the two of them leaving behind a baby with Harry named Godfather, the chain of it going on, love insisting on continuing even as the war tried to end it. Others, so many others, the cost of it almost past bearing. And through all of it Hermione fought at his side and Ron at his other, the three of them who had jumped down a trapdoor at 11 holding hands now holding a line at 17, because where one of them stood was where all of them stood and always had been. The old defense club came back in an hour, summoned by the enchanted coins Hermione had made 2 years before, the coins going hot in pockets all over the country, and they came, every one of them who could, running up to the castle to stand in a war they had trained for since they were 15 without quite believing it would arrive. Neville Longbottom, who could barely lift a wand in first year, led them, and before the night was out would pull the sword of Gryffindor from a burning hat and strike the head clean off Voldemort's last living Horcrux with it, the round-faced, frightened boy of first year become, at the very end, exactly the hero the prophecy might have named instead of Harry, had a single choice years before fallen differently. Luna fought beside Ron, Ginny fought beside her mother. The professors who had taught them defended the castle that had taught them. It was the thing Hermione had built in a hidden room standing up at last to do the work it was built for, and Harry, fighting through the smoke with the two people who had been beside him since the trapdoor, understood that this was the whole shape of the answer. Not one chosen boy alone against the dark, but a great crowd of the loved and the loving, called together by a girl with a handful of enchanted coins, refusing as one to let the warm corners of the world be put out. They held the line and they paid for it, and the cost would never stop mattering, but they held. The diadem, the last hidden Horcrux but one, they found and destroyed in a room of lost things while the castle burned. And then in a lull in the worst of it, in a boathouse by the lake, Harry learned the last terrible truth from the memories of a dying man. Snape had been Dumbledore's all along. The murder on the tower had been a mercy arranged between a dying old wizard and the one man cold enough to do what mercy required, and Snape had spent his whole life, since before Harry was born, in love with a red-haired woman who had chosen someone else, protecting her son from the shadows out of a grief that had never healed. Harry watched Snape's memories pour silver into a basin as he bled out, and learned that he had been hated and guarded by the same person all these years, and it rearranged the whole world. And he learned the last thing, the thing Dumbledore had known and not said, the final piece of the arithmetic the old wizard had carried alone. Harry was a Horcrux. The night Voldemort's curse had rebounded and failed to kill the infant Harry, a piece of Voldemort's torn soul had broken off and lodged in the only living thing in the room, in Harry himself, in the scar. That was the connection. That was the parcel tongue, the visions, the hot wire from the scar. Harry had been carrying a fragment of his enemy's soul his entire life, and as long as it lived, Voldemort could not truly die, and the only way to destroy it was for Harry to let Voldemort kill him. Dumbledore had known since Harry was a baby. The whole long preparation, the cupboard, the warnings, the lessons in standing alone, the steel behind the warmth, all of it had been the work of a man raising a boy he believed would have to walk at the end, willingly to his own death so the world could be saved. That is exactly what I have been afraid of, Dumbledore had said in his office 2 years before, that you went and got a reason to come back. Now Harry understood the whole of it. Dumbledore had needed a weapon that would let itself be spent, and had been horrified at the last to discover he had raised instead a boy with everything to live for, who would have every reason in the world to fight to survive the very thing the plan required. Harry sat alone in a quiet corner with the truth, and understood that the hour had come that Dumbledore had warned him of at 11, in front of a mirror. The hour when the burden was his and his alone, when there was no one in his pocket and no phoenix in the air, when he had to walk into the dark by himself. And he understood, sitting there, the thing that was going to undo Voldemort forever, which was that even now, even here, at the one moment that was supposed to be his alone, he was not alone and never would be because of who he was carrying. He did not say goodbye to Hermione. He could not have borne it, and neither could she, and a goodbye would have meant explaining where he was going, and she would have stopped him, or worse, come with him, and this was the one road he had to walk without her at his side. So he did the harder thing. He walked out of the castle and into the forbidden forest toward Voldemort to die, and he let her think for one terrible hour that he was simply somewhere in the chaos, because to take her with him here would be to lose her, and he had spent 6 years learning that keeping her alive sometimes meant being the one who walked toward the danger so she did not have to. But he did not walk alone, and that was the whole point, the thing Dumbledore had never understood and Voldemort never could. He had the resurrection stone. It had come to him at the very end, hidden in the first golden snitch he had ever caught, opening at the touch of his lips and the words, "I am about to die," and he turned it 3 times in his hand in the dark of the forest, and they came. His mother and his father, young and unafraid. Sirius, his godfather, easy and warm as he had been before Azkaban. Remus Lupin, who had died an hour before, who had taught Harry to cast light. They came and walked beside him through the dark trees, not ghosts, something gentler, something that the love in him had called up out of death to see him through, and they told him it did not hurt, that it was quicker than falling asleep, that they were proud of him, that they were so close, all of them always, the whole time. "You'll stay with me." Harry asked them the last thing, the only thing. "Until the very end," said his father. "He won't be able to see you," Harry asked, meaning Voldemort. "We are part of you," said his mother, and her eyes were Harry's eyes, invisible to anyone else. And Harry understood, walking the last yards of his life through a dark forest with his dead beside him, that this was the final answer to the loneliest plan ever made. Dumbledore had spent a childhood trying to teach him to walk into the dark alone, and here at the very end, on the one road he truly had to walk by himself, he was surrounded, carried, accompanied by every person who had ever loved him, called up out of memory and death by the very capacity for attachment the old wizard had tried so hard to burn out of him. He had been right at 11 in front of a mirror, and again at 12 in a hospital wing, and again every year since. The love was not the weakness. Even death could not make him alone. He had too many people. He had always had too many people, from the moment a girl sat down across from him on a train. He thought about her in the last of the walk, deliberately, as another condemned man might pray. He thought about the train and the troll and the third window and the fire under the school and a frozen lake and a snowy churchyard and an orchard at sunset. He did not let himself think her name as a goodbye, because it was not a goodbye. He was doing this for her, so that she could live in a world with no Voldemort in it, and a thing done out of love is not a leaving even when it looks exactly like one. He hoped she would understand that after. He hoped she would forgive him for going where she could not follow. And he thought at the very last, stepping into the clearing where the end was waiting, that of all the people who had walked to their deaths in that long war, he might be the only one doing it with his whole heart full, and that this was her doing, and that it was the finest gift anyone had ever been given, to be allowed to die as a person who had been completely loved. He let Voldemort kill him. He did not fight it, did not raise his wand, stood in the clearing and let the green light come, for Hermione, for Ron, for the school, for the whole world of ordinary warm corners that Voldemort wanted to put out. And the green light took him, and the fragment of soul he had carried his whole life died with him, and Harry Potter fell. There was a place that looked like King's Cross, bright and white and empty, and Dumbledore was there, whole and unwithered, and Harry was there, and somewhere a small broken creature whimpered beneath a bench that was the last of Voldemort gone out of him. They talked, the two of them, Harry and the old wizard who had loved him and used him, in the bright quiet place between life and death. Dumbledore wept and asked Harry's forgiveness, fully and at last, for the cupboard and the steel, and the long lonely preparation of a child for slaughter. And Harry, who had died and found he was not finished, gave it to him completely, because the dead old wizard before him had also in his way loved Harry as much as he was able, and had made a terrible mistake about the human heart and had lived long enough to see it, and there's no one easier to forgive than someone who knows exactly what they did wrong. "I did you a great wrong, Harry," Dumbledore said. "I should have raised a boy who knew he was loved. Instead, I tried to raise a weapon that would not mind dying, and I very nearly succeeded, and it would have been the worst thing I ever did. You were saved from me. Do you know what saved you?" "Yes," Harry said, "I know exactly what saved me." "A girl who fixed your glasses on a train," said Dumbledore, "and never once stopped. I built my plans on the assumption that you could be made to stand alone. I was wrong, and I have never been so glad to be wrong about anything in a long and arrogant life. Love was the variable I left out of every calculation, because I had decided long ago that it was a weakness to be managed." His eyes were wet and bright. "It was the only strength that ever mattered. It is the thing Voldemort marked as nothing, the thing he could not see, the thing he has lost the war to without ever once understanding what beat him. He will fall to it within the hour, and he will die not knowing why, and the why is this, that you were loved, and you loved in return, and it made you into the one thing in all the world he could neither corrupt nor kill nor stand alone against." He smiled, and it was the grandfather, only the grandfather, the steel gone out of him forever. Go back, Harry, you are not finished. You have, I think, a very great deal of living left to do, and one particular person to do it with. Go back and finish him, and then go and live, which is the harder and the better thing, and the thing I most failed to let you do. Harry went back. The rest was quick in the end, the way the truest things are quick. He came back to life in the clearing, having let the soul fragment die, the last Horcrux gone, Voldemort mortal at last and not knowing it. He let himself be carried, apparently dead, back to the castle as Voldemort's trophy, and the war's last act played out in the great hall where Harry had been sorted 7 years before. He threw off the appearance of death. The castle erupted, and in the end it came down as the prophecy had promised to the two of them, Harry and Voldemort, circling each other in the wreckage of the hall while the whole exhausted world watched. Harry was calm in the end, calmer than he had ever been, because he had already died once that night and found that even death had not made him alone, and a person who has learned that has nothing left to fear. He did not boast and he did not rage. He told the truth in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the silent hall, so that everyone would hear exactly how the most feared wizard of the age was going to fall. He told Voldemort about the wand, that its loyalty had passed to Harry weeks before in a snatched scuffle at Malfoy Manor, and that it would never kill its true master. He told him the Horcruxes were all destroyed, every hidden piece of his soul, the diary and the ring and the locket and the cup and the diadem and the snake and the fragment that had lived in Harry himself, all gone, so that there was nothing left tying him to life but his own ruined, mortal body. And he told him the thing under all of it, the thing Voldemort had never once been able to see in 60 years of grasping for power. That he had lost the war the night he killed a woman who chose to die for her son, and had gone on losing it every day since, to phoenixes and house elves, and a hidden room full of children and a girl who fixed a boy's glasses on a train, because he had built his whole immortal life on the belief that love was nothing, a weakness for lesser men, and the entire war had been, from the very first, the slow, patient business of the universe proving him wrong. Harry did not need a great spell. He needed only the truth, and the truth was on his side now, all of it. The wand that would not work for Voldemort because its loyalty had passed to Harry in a disarming at Malfoy Manor. The soul torn to ruin past any healing, and the thing under all of it, the thing that had been deciding the war since a troll on a Halloween night when they were 11. Harry told Voldemort the truth, all of it, in front of everyone, and gave him one last chance at the remorse that might have healed him, which Voldemort could not even understand, and then Voldemort threw the killing curse and Harry threw a disarming charm, the same two spells that had met in a graveyard 3 years before. And this time the wand that served Harry would not turn against its master, and the killing curse rebounded on the one who cast it, and Tom Riddle fell, finally and forever. An ordinary dead man, undone by the love he had spent his whole life refusing to believe in. The hall was silent for one heartbeat, and then it was not silent at all. Harry did not remember afterward who reached him first in the roar that followed, except that he knew it was Hermione, because of course it was Hermione. It had been Hermione first since a train when they were 11, and would be Hermione first until they were old. She came through the crowd and the noise and the dead and the living, and she reached him, and he caught her, and the two of them stood in the middle of the saved world holding on to each other while it cheered, and he put his face in her hair, and she held him together as she always had, and neither of them said anything for a long time because they had finally, after 7 years, reached the place past words and got to stay there. Long after, when the dead were buried and the castle began to be rebuilt and the world remembered how to sleep, Harry took Hermione down to the lake. The half-ruined bench was still there, under the beach where the path gave out, one slat still missing. They sat on it in the early summer light, the two of them, with the lake calm and the towers of Hogwarts going up again behind them stone by stone, and for a while they did not talk because the not talking was still the whole point of the place, and that had not changed and never would. "I keep thinking about the train," Hermione said eventually to the water. 11 years old, looking for a toad, I almost didn't come into that compartment. There were other compartments. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Imagine," "No," said Harry. "I can't actually. I've tried. There isn't a version of me that works without you in it. I checked." He reached over and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face, the old gesture, hers first, his now too, worn smooth by 7 years of use. "The mirror knew, you know, first year, the mirror of Erised, the one that shows you what you want most. I told you I saw my family in it, and I did, but I never told you the rest. You were in it too. Standing right there with my mum and dad at the edge of everyone who loved me like you belonged there. I was 11 and I didn't have the word for why. I've got it now." Hermione was quiet a moment. "You never told me that," she said, "in 7 years. I was saving it," Harry said, "for when I had the word." She laced her fingers through his on the broken bench, and the lake went gold, and somewhere behind them the school that had been the first home either of them truly had rose slowly back into the sky, and the war was over, and they were 17 and alive and not alone and never would be again. They would marry in time when the worst of the grieving had eased and the world had steadied. They would build a home that was loud and warm and the opposite of a cupboard, and fill it with the children of people who chose each other and meant it. The dreams faded in time, as dreams do when there is enough waking happiness to crowd them out. The scar, which had been a battlefield his whole life, went quiet and stayed quiet, an ordinary old mark on an ordinary forehead, because the thing it had been joined to was gone and was not coming back. Harry became an Auror, and then, when the dark had truly thinned, something gentler. Hermione rose through a rebuilt ministry, rewriting the cruel old laws she had spent her girlhood reading and hating, and the two of them did with the mending of the world what they had done with every problem since the troll, she organizing it and he carrying it, and the work coming out whole between them. They were not always easy. Two strong people who have survived a war are never always easy. They had a lifetime of practice at choosing each other by the time it mattered most, and they were good at it, better than they were at anything else, and they had a creed for the hard days that had been tested against the very worst the world could do and had not broken. Hermione would never quite stop straightening his glasses. Harry would never quite stop saving her a seat. There would be a table in their house where the light fell best, and on it always 2 cups, because the world still ran through that table first. And every year, on the anniversary of a Halloween night when an 11-year-old went the wrong way down a whole castle for a girl crying alone in a bathroom, the two of them would say the 3 words to each other that had grown, over a lifetime, from a child's brave creed into the truest description either of them had ever found for the thing they had built and defended and refused, against a whole dark world, to ever let themselves be talked out of. Friendship and bravery, Harry said on the bench in the gold light at the beginning of the rest of it. And love, said Hermione, and held on and did not let go and never would. Chapter 7 end.